The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, December 18th, 2018. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, editor-at-large of New York Magazine, Rebecca Traister, author of Good and Mad, The Revolutionary Power of Women's Anger. Also on the program today, following the release of a damning Mueller memo that shows he was directed to lie, Michael Flynn to be sentenced today. Meanwhile, St. John McCain's last reminder that he was a pretender. The Arizona losing candidate Martha McSally will be appointed senator from Arizona. Meanwhile, Elizabeth Warren wants the government to manufacture generic drugs. That's right. And the vulture capitalist who skinned Sears alive and destroyed its workers give themselves a bonus. Homelessness arises in the shadow of the continuing to grow wealth inequality in this country, and U.S. student debt has doubled since the recession to $1.5 trillion. And Amazon Kush Cuomo implements Governor Nixon's proposal, says pot to be legal in New York State next year. And while Tucker Carlson losing advertisers because he's an ass, and Patreon fires back. And lastly, Republican leaders look to beg Donald Trump to not shut down the government, ladies and gentlemen. It is a Tuesday. Just a little programming note. I am going to introduce our guest, which we pre-taped earlier, and then I'm going to skedaddle. I've got to go do a... I never do this. You know, I get asked to do MSNBC during the day, and blessedly I say I can't because I've got my own show, and I've got to do that. Because more often than not, I mean, it's no... Well, maybe it is, but no offense to any of the daily shows on MSNBC. It just tends to be not my fare. Do you know what I mean? But occasionally I'll do it, but for the most part I won't. But today we're pre-taping a Chris Hayes like Christmas year-long special, which I'm actually pretty excited about. I think Eddie Glaude is one of the guests. Who are the other ones? Let's see. Who do we have here? Tag team partners?
Your tag team partner, Rubin?
Dave Rubin? What? What are you talking about?
Jennifer Rubin.
Oh, Jennifer Rubin? No, it's all people on the left. I mean, I guess maybe she's had a.
What about Carter Page?
Carter Page will not be there.
Oh.
Gosh, I don't have the list. I can't remember, but it was an impressive. All I know is Eddie Glaude and Christina Greer, but it's going to be a full hour. Whatever. We're going to record it. You'll see it. I don't even know who's going to show up. So But that's where I'm headed. Before I go, I should remind you that 2018 has been a difficult year for human rights. I mean, frankly, I would imagine 2017 wasn't terribly better. Or frankly, 2016. But have you ever wondered how rights abuses are documented around the world? You probably have. With the sheer volume of global crises we're seeing, from civilian casualties in Syria to ethnic cleansing in Myanmar to the caging of children on U.S. borders, it's critical that we expose the truth in order to defend the rights of all and bring those responsible to justice. Human Rights Watch does just that. They are an independent, nonprofit organization known for their accurate fact-finding, impartial reporting, and targeted advocacy, often in partnership with local activists and human rights groups. They accept no money from any government, but they rely on the support of informed, dedicated people just like you. So if human rights are important to you, visit hrw.org/majority to make a donation and support its vital work around the world. That's hrw.org/majority. When you do, not only is your gift tax deductible, it will be matched dollar for dollar until 2019. That means your donation will go twice as far to advance justice and defend the basic dignity of people who need it most. Again, that's hrw.org/majority. Oh, and this is a great gift. There's still time. And actually, this is a perfect gift if you are like some people I know and have not given their Christmas gifts yet. Have you got yours, Matt?
I got a third of them.
Yeah, right. Well, you got a whole 5 days left, buddy. Is it 5 days? Well, I guess you got a little bit more. Does it always fall on the 25th?
Every
Christmas?
time.
Every time. All right. That's weird. Anyways, I got this for my folks last year. It's just wrapping up. I may actually extend it. StoryWorth makes it easy and fun for your loved ones to share their stories, so you can get to know them in a whole new way with questions you've never thought to ask. You can purchase a subscription for someone you love, and each week, StoryWorth will send them an email with a question about their life. You're building basically a memoir for... It's a great gift for your parents, your grandparents. They simply reply with their story. They can record it over the phone by calling the StoryWorth number. All stories are private, only shared with the family that you choose. You can easily and securely save and edit all your stories on StoryWorth.com. After a year, the stories will be bound into a beautiful keepsake book. StoryWorth brings families together every week. It's a great way to connect with your loved ones, learn about your relatives, and preserve your memories for future generations. StoryWorth makes a great gift for the holidays for any of your loved ones who enjoy telling stories. To be honest with you, it's great for... It's a great thing to do, to send to your parents and then give to your kids. Or just send to your parents so you have it as a record of the family. Both my folks are just wrapping up theirs now. So we're going to bind them and probably make, I don't know how many of the books we'll make, because I'm going to give them to my sisters. I'll probably give them to my kids. I'll probably give them one to the parents. It's one of those deals. That's the way you got to do your gifts, you know. And it's fascinating. These are questions that, you know, you just don't think to ask. For $20 off, visit StoryWorth.com/majority when you subscribe. That is StoryWorth.com, STORY, Worth, WORTH.com, /majority for $20 off. Okay, so we're going to take a break in a second. I will remind you, if you are a member of this program, today you're either going to get an audio file in your member feed, right? We'll release that later today, and I put it in quotes, the debate I had. It was really an interview. It was really an interrogation.
A dialogue.
It was a dialogue, but it really was a what do you call it? Interrogator? No. What would you call that?
Inquisition?
No, there's another word for it. But the point is that this guy, Brandon Tarkatoff, What is it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you got it.
Wait, no. I was like, what is?
Brennan Straka.
Okay, I get him confused with the former television executive from the 70s, Brandon Tartikoff.
Right.
Target. Okay, so anyway, Brandon Straka. He's a guy who set up a thing called Walk Away, which was, I guess, an attempt to influence the midterm elections. And if it did influence the midterm elections, like I told him to his face, if I was the head of the Democratic Party, I would pay him to do it again, because it was not only not successful, it was whatever the opposite of totally unsuccessful, of being successful could be. And it probably did more harm than good. And so we were talking about him. We did a full 10 minutes out of the 15 hours we did that week, or the hundreds of hours we did this year. We did 10 minutes on his silly video, and he got very upset about it. And so I went on his show to tell him, to say to his face what we said on the video, because there was nothing. I think I probably went a little further. And anyways, it was fun, and it's funny. You're not going to learn anything from this. There's not going to be, like when we debate the libertarians around here, the idea is that, when you run into people, there's going to be arguments that you can employ. This is not going to be one of those situations. This is just watching me be, as smug as I've probably ever been in my life in a public setting. And so if you are a member of the program, or if you're a Patreon, you will get access to it. And check the member post. We'll put a link to the video in it as well, so you can watch it. And you can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Do it now. You will have access to all our archives, of course. All right, folks, quick break. When we come back, I'll be talking to Rebecca Traister, and then Mike will be doing the fun half. I'm the writer-at-large at New York Magazine, author of All the Single Ladies. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome back to the program the writer-at-large at New York Magazine, author of All the Single Ladies, and now the equally as New York Times bestselling Good and Mad, The Revolutionary Power of Women's Anger, Rebecca Traister. welcome to the program, Rebecca.
Thanks for having me back, Sam.
All right, so let's just, I'm struck by, all right, let's start with just how you decided to write a book about anger, because in many respects, well, I don't want to say all respect, but in many respects, your sort of, I guess, personal journey with this issue is mirrored in the country contemporaneously all around us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things that is true about my professional work that's been going on now for, 15 years. I've been a feminist journalist for 15 years, and anger has always undergirded my work. I write about gendered and racial and economic inequality. I write about progressive politics. I write about the women's movement and its many iterations. And you wouldn't do that work if you weren't angry. So it's not as though that is new. But one of the things, you asked how I came to write this book. One of the things that became clear to me is I have also, in my work as a journalist, sort of tried not to lead with anger, because I know that women's anger, I know from the history of how women's movements are caricatured and characterized, how progressive movements and women within them are caricatured as troublemakers, as disruptive, as hysterical, as illegitimate, as particularly for women of color, as threatening and militant. How progressive disruptiveness is characterized as mob-like, right? We see a lot of examples of that right now. And because of all that, all those messages that, in fact, have been internalized over my, 43 years on this earth, I have taken care to not make anger my the primary register with which I express myself. I have taken care in my writing to sort of make anger easier, the anger that necessarily undergirds the kind of work that I do, more palatable, to be funny and lighthearted and cheeky and ironic, and I haven't wanted to look too hard at either the anger that I cover. I haven't wanted to portray some of the people and figures that I cover as angry, or present myself as angry, because I know that for women and for lots of kinds of marginalized, vulnerable people, anger becomes a liability. Anger undermines your message. And in the wake of the 2016 election, there was so much anger bubbling, and I found it hard. The way I put it in my own head was, it was hard for me to think straight because I was so angry. And it was like seeing the anger not as a clarifying or instructive force or reaction, but as an obstructive one, as something that clouded my thinking. And, it was in a personal conversation I had with my husband where I sort of expressed just that thought, like, I'm trying to figure out what my next set of responsibilities is as a writer, as a white feminist, as a, somebody looking at progressive politics. What's my work going forward? But I can't think clearly because I'm so angry. And my husband sort of said in passing, well, maybe you should write about anger. And it was just this bare suggestion that I was like, oh my God, what if I look directly at the anger, the thing that we're supposed to sort of cover over or put to the side or not stare directly at, that undergirded, like that was the thing that led me to write this book. And it was incredibly revelatory and freeing, and I learned a lot, because I learned about how the degree to which we're all discouraged from considering anger as its own, as politically consequential, as a potent force in social and political movements, when in fact it always has been. And so it was really the process of writing the book was like lifting a curtain on a thing we'd been trying to take care not to look directly at or deal directly in for so long. And it was I've learned so much just by the act of sort of taking the anger, not just my own, it's not about my anger, but the anger of women who have preceded me and who have been angry long before I ever made it to this earth, taking that anger seriously and looking at what it's wrought, the way it's changed laws, norms, customs, protections, how it has been the propellant force behind so many social movements. It's been incredibly surprising, and I've learned so much.
All right. Okay. How much... All right, because I feel like I have now 8 questions I want to ask simultaneously, but I know that's not fair.
I think I just answered 8 questions simultaneously.
Well,
so
but yes, Okay, so let's just. I want to just keep it sort of somewhat personal, and then I want to get to that sort of the more of the role of anger in the context of progress for women, and then we'll get into sort of how. Anger is received, and expressed differently, obviously, between men and women, and differently situated women. But that quality of being aware, and I feel like every woman must, to some degree or another, have an awareness that there is a danger in expressing anger in a way that's not dangerous for men. And
yes, of course.
To what extent do you think the election of Trump as an inciting event, sort of raised people's consciousness to how much they were suppressing, or simply said, you know what, I'm done with the suppressing?
I think it was a combination of factors. I think that excuse me. I think that the shock of it, and by shock of it, I mean I was somebody who covered Hillary Clinton's campaign. I was not shocked that Hillary Clinton lost the presidency. Simultaneously, if this makes any sense, I was shocked that Donald Trump won.
Right.
Shocked into almost a point of paralysis, like the reality settling in of the fact I was not surprised that Hillary Clinton didn't win, but the fact that the man who did win is the president was it was a shock to the system, right? And I think I'm not alone in those things, even though it seems like they don't make sense.
Well, the idea is that he should have been disqualified because of who he was in some way. Obviously, there's no official to step in and say, you're disqualified. But the country should have disqualified the guy regardless of any of the shortcomings that Clinton may have had as a candidate.
Right. So here's what, there are two things, well, there are a million things, but a couple things stand out about what happened in the wake of that election. One is that it was such a shock for so many people, and there were, I cover women in politics, I wrote about Hillary Clinton for a long time. That, to some degree, explains why I wasn't surprised that she lost, right?
Yeah.
For a lot of people who don't, who aren't looking at the history of women in politics, who aren't looking closely at Hillary Clinton and her campaign in the way that I was for really almost a decade, I think that her loss was a shock. There was the expectation, and in part, this ties to the next thing I'm going to say. It's born out of a pernicious set of lies that Americans like to tell themselves all the time throughout our history, which is that the inequities on which this country was built have been rectified. They've been addressed, they've been fixed. The great lie that is told people who, from the start in this country, have been rendered marginal or who have been subjugated or oppressed in some way, is that it's been fixed now, that the inequities are in our past. And we saw an example of that during the Obama administration, when the notion that Barack Obama had been elected president somehow supplied this and grounded a myth that racism was a thing of our past, when in fact we know that of course it's not. Of course it's not. But there was a way in which you could say, well, look, a black man is president, like how, anything is possible. This is not racism. We solved it. The civil rights movement solved it. The abolition movement solved it. Barack Obama solved it. It's done.
The Supreme Court basically said that in their gutting of the Voting Rights Act.
That's exactly right. That is what they said. This is no longer a problem that plagues us. We no longer need these protections. Okay? Now, that is part of, and the same thing happens around gender. The same thing, and we've heard it. We're bathed in it, right? There are more women on college campuses than there are men. In fact, there's the boy crisis in education. There's, we've solved this twice. We've had an inevitable presidential candidate who was a woman, then won both times. I don't know if you heard. She was inevitable. It's weird that she hasn't been president yet because she was totally inevitable. This is a done deal, and in fact, part of why people assumed that Hillary Clinton was going to win is because of all the sort of structural stuff that had historically kept women from the presidency or even a nomination from a major party for the presidency. Stuff like they didn't have the support of their party. They didn't have the fundraising capabilities that their male peers had. Hillary Clinton anticipated all those things that had kept Shirley Chisholm from winning a nomination in 1972. Shirley Chisholm, who had neither the full-throated support of her white feminist allies in the movement, her activist allies, or the Congressional Black Caucus, her colleagues in the House of Representatives. She talked about that she didn't have the sort of structural institutional support. She didn't have the fundraising money. In 1987, Representative Pat Schroeder thought about running for president. She couldn't raise the money, and she didn't have the support of her party. These were part of the structural impediments that had been in women's ways. Hillary Clinton wanted to be president. She tried twice. She knew what the impediments were. She gamed the system. She's like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get the support of my party, and I'm going to get the fundraising money. Well, that made her appear to be part of the establishment, which she is. It's not just an appearance. And sort of took away the notion that everybody was like, there was a sense that it didn't even matter that she was a woman because she was the establishment candidate. She was the one who was coming in with more power than anybody else, right?
Right.
And that, of course, wound up working against her in 2016. But all of that is founded, all the beliefs to be able to say that a woman candidate for president is inevitable. And people did say this about Hillary in 2008, and they said it again in 2016. It functions alongside that sort of Supreme Court, like we can gut the Voting Rights Act. We could never say in this country, it is utterly dishonest to ever suggest that a nation that has never had a woman president, that has until 2016 never had a woman nominated by a major party for the presidency, that has never had a woman vice president, that a woman would inevitably become the president. That is a lie, and it's part of a far more pernicious lie that is attached to all this. Look, post-feminist thought, there was an anti-feminist backlash in the 80s and 90s that undergirded this. There's no longer anything for women to be angry about. This was especially true for white middle-class women who, of course, did reap many of the benefits of the civil rights and women's movements of the 1960s and 70s, and did reap the benefits of affirmative action at higher rates than almost anybody else, and did have all kinds of middle-class white women who got all kinds of rights and protections extended to them. And those were a lot of the women who sort of swallowed this notion that there was no longer, if they were angry about what they perceived to be sexism or misogyny, unequal power in the world, that anger was probably illegitimate because it's not true, right? That is the lie. We solved it. There are more women on college campuses. There's an inevitable woman president. Things are fine for women. Now, what Donald Trump winning the presidency did, and it's not just this, it was exposed that even the women who basically won white patriarchy, even Hillary Clinton, a wealthy woman who had gamed out the system, who had gotten institutional support, who was wildly qualified to be president, could still be beaten by this cartoon character of juvenile incompetence and racism and xenophobia and sexism. That made undeniable that women had something to be mad about, right? And it's in the same way you saw a similar thing happen around the hashtag #MeToo movement in the fall of 2017, when many of the most prominent complainants about sexual assault and harassment were not only middle-class white women, but extremely wealthy white actresses who told some of the first stories about Harvey Weinstein. Right. These were women who, would have been told, like, what if they're rich, they have power in Hollywood, they have every advantage and every privilege, and yet they could still tell stories about how the arc of their career was fundamentally shaped by assault, about how they had experienced the in many cases, physical violence, sexual violence, or, harassment, how they had been sidelined, how they had had less power in a situation. A lot of this made people aware of and better able to give voice to the fury that they felt and have things to pin it on. The same is true of Christine Blasey Ford, a middle-class white woman, an advanced degree. It was evidence. There's evidence out there that everything is not equal, that there are still power imbalances. And it's a period, a window in which there's ample evidence to correct the pernicious lie that America tells itself over and over again, which is that inequity is a thing of structural, systemic inequity is a thing of its past. But what that means is that it's brought a lot of middle-class white women to anger in a way that they haven't been before. And that is the population that is sort of newly awakened to its anger. And it stems from the shock of seeing Hillary Clinton lose the presidency, and also the realization that, okay, now I can point to certain things and say, I have every reason to be mad. You can't tell me that my anger is illegitimate.
I mean, the perniciousness of that lie, it seems to me, is even greater, or was even greater than the lie that we tell ourselves about race, because it almost didn't even have to be articulated. I mean, like I feel like there was, the Supreme Court is going to make an argument. Like, we don't have racism anymore because they have to, almost. It was almost the notion that there was not this sort of a deep misogyny in the, interwoven into our American psyche. It was almost as if that argument didn't even have to be made. It was so accepted that it wasn't there on some level.
Well, there are things about a gender power imbalance that are very particular to the nature of the fact that, women are an oppressed majority. It's a very unusual structural reality, right?
Right.
There are more women than there are men. And yet women are subjugated and oppressed and offered less economically, socially, sexually, professionally, in the public sphere. And that creates a number of crazy dynamics, including that every woman has men in her life, and every man has women in his life. And that means when you and that's one of the reasons that it is the women's movement is explosive, it is combustible, it is always precarious, and it really only coheres, sort of, if you look at the historical story, only about every 50 years. It's very hard to converge around a movement that wants to challenge gendered power imbalances. And that's because the nature of gender relationships, which are familial, social, sexual, romantic, within a community, means that if you challenge those gender imbalances, you are disrupting intimate personal relationships.
Right.
And that is different from other kinds of social and even identity politics disruptions. within power structures, because it means fighting a battle that might have consequences in your bed, at your kitchen table, at your Thanksgiving dinners, right? It's changing dynamics of romantic and marital partnerships. It's changing dynamics within the offices in which you work. And that is it makes things, it's hard to get people to have that fight because it disrupts the dailiness of their lives.
And so it's both, it seems, the stakes and the constraints. So I mean, it's both like the price that you could pay, but also just structurally, there's not even the room to take a step back and assess because it's so daily.
Because it's all kinds of things. These are intimate relationships with the people we love. You know, it's one of the reasons that the conversation around sexual harassment, you know, there have been so many iterations of this. You know, this has been a building awareness starting in the mid-'70s when women began filing some of the first sexual harassment lawsuits. Many of them were women of color who were borrowing from civil rights law to, you know, and sort of using the things that they had learned, you know, via fighting for legal protections around race and applying them to the treatment that they were getting within offices. And that led to the sort of naming of a behavior that came in the 1970s to be called sexual harassment, worked its way up through the Supreme Court. In 1986, there's a Supreme Court decision that bans sexual harassment under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. Then in 91, you have Anita Hill describing the sexual harassment she experienced while working with Clarence Thomas. It, of course, does not stop his ascent to the Supreme Court. In fact, his place on the Supreme Court leads to and is part of the gutting of the Voting Rights Act, which indirectly leads to or directly leads to the election of Donald Trump, right? You can draw a direct line between all of this stuff. Yeah. But it is also true that Anita Hill's testimony also leads to a record, you know, year, the first year of the woman, in which a record number of women are elected to office. It leads to a broader conversation around sexual harassment. But when you talk about these things, one of the reasons it takes so long is because it means changing behaviors. Like there are so many, we are intimately dependent on and connected to some of the, I write in the book that it means the bad guys are in many cases also our good guys. Right? They are our colleagues and our friends and our boyfriends and our husbands and our fathers and our sons. And that's why you can hear this language of intimate reliance and intimate loyalty. For example, in the pushback against after the Kavanaugh hearings, when you heard so many women deployed actually on behalf of white patriarchal power saying, well, our sons are vulnerable. This is what Donald Trump says. It's a very scary time for young men. The notion of maternity, we have to protect our boys. Those are the kinds of relationships that are thrown into disarray when you have a mass conversation and desire to revise the rules of a game that a lot of people are deep into their lives having already played.
Right.
And so, you know, that makes these things really complicated because if you change the rules mid-game, some people who you love and who you're attached to, who you're dependent on, either whether it's emotionally or economically because they're the breadwinners or they're your bosses or they're your mentor who gave you your, you know, and they may have behaved in ways that you can intellectually acknowledge are bad, but there are real perils and costs, emotional, professional, and political, to saying, look, you violated these rules that we're now going to be enforcing, and you've got to face repercussion for them. These are complicated challenges to make because there are costs that wind up being personal. The disruption of marriages, I write in my book about how some of the women's activism that we've seen erupt over the past 2 years, women who'd previously not been politically active, who'd been perhaps voted Democrat, but mostly had been kind of sleepwalking, kind of, you know, passive in their political investments, and are now devoting their every hour to activism, to electing candidates, to participating in teacher strikes and labor disputes. Those women often, they're talking increasingly about their marriages ending, about divorce, because the terms in which they'd entered their marriage, you know, had changed. They were now different people. They want different things from their partnerships and from the way that they organize their lives, and marriages are ending. And we know that that was used against the second wave women's movement because it did change assumptions about who was permitted what kinds of opportunities and who, you know, who should have what kind of power within our most intimate relationships. And the divorce rate spiked in the 1970s.
All right.
And anti-feminists used it against them and say, look, feminists hate marriage. They ended all these marriages in the 70s. These are really complicated changes to try to make.
Because I mean, and like you say, it's on both ends. I mean, Brett Kavanaugh was up there. He was very angry because he was raised in such a way that I was allowed to do that as a kid, and that was the agreement that I made when I got born. That I will, as long as I keep it back in the, in college and maybe my youthful indiscretions, then I could go on and do this, and I get a gimme. And you're trying to change.
I like beer.
Right.
I like beer, and you're telling me that I'm not allowed to be angry in my love of beer.
Right.
Yes,
I mean,
no.
that was. But
it was that's kind of code. That was kind of right, because
right.
he wasn't copping to the thing he was actually being accused of, which is assault of a woman. But he was. That's a great. I mean, in fact, the beer thing. And the sort of defense of a certain kind of social life that he had, that we know is quite closely connected to the kinds of allegations that were made against him. It was a sort of like, this is how I live my life, and I had my calendars like my dad, and I love beer, and I Squee or whatever his name was, right? Like there was a sense that
we all, when we go to this course, we all know this is the rule. We all get the Mulligan. And you're telling me that the Mulligan doesn't count anymore. And that Mulligan, of course, was built upon the oppression and suppression and the physical violence against women. And he felt like, well, but I didn't do it since then, theoretically, and that type of probably. Right. I mean, I'm giving maybe the benefit of the doubt. But all right, so I want to just circle back though, because there was a lot of things that came together between Donald Trump's win and Hillary Clinton's loss. And, one dynamic that just strikes me is that, I don't know if you read that book, The Persistence of the Color Line by Randall Terry, and
I haven't read it yet.
His argument, it was many years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And he argued that, Barack Obama could not talk about race and could not engage in race. And could not show anger because it would have destroyed everything. And certainly Hillary Clinton, like anger at a time where there's an anger in the country, she's not allowed to access it because of the way that anger is perceived by women. So basically one arrow that would have been there for any politician who was not a woman, that's taken out of the quiver at that point, right?
That is exactly right, and that is exactly right. And she was running against two men on both her left and her right who were able to access anger, and they both used it quite masterfully, right? And my politics are on the side of one of those guys, was Bernie Sanders, speaking with righteous fury about economic inequality and the 99% and the that he was able to channel the rage of millions of his supporters who were feeling, in my view, had every reason in the world to be livid, and he was able to be a voice of that and wag his finger and shake his head and pound a podium. And Donald Trump, whose politics are anathema to me, I mean, he was able to challenge a rage coming from a sort of a base that was furious about the perceived incursions on its status and its power, and he was able to channel a fundamentally racist, xenophobic, misogynistic fury through truly, in many cases, direct calls to violence. I mean, in the old days, we used to take protesters out, and he was able to actually give voice to a punitive, not just borderline, but sometimes directly violent rage that had racist and sexist implications, to talk about those fears that have obviously worked for his base. And Clinton, when she tried to be angry, first of all, I mean, this is a woman who was raised, also born in an era in which this was completely verboten, the raising of the female voice, had actually been a young adult at the moment of the second wave women's movement. But she had already, she had been raised in a country that had no tolerance, made no space for the fury especially of powerful women who were threatening male power in any way. And it is inauthentic when she tries to, transmit rage. She would sometimes thunder into a microphone, and what would everybody, by the way, including me, do is rear back and say, stop yelling, because we're not used to hearing that
Well, even going back to 92 when she said, I'm not going to be baking cookies in the kitchen or something, and I was no fan of Bill Clinton at that time either, but the reaction to that was just, I mean, that dynamic, is like, reminds me of like when Steven Spielberg did his first movie and it was a bust, and then he decided, I'm only making huge hits from now on that are less nuanced. I felt like that was her moment where she was like, all right, now I've got to change my hairdo and et cetera, et cetera. But so she's,
I think the one that came before that was when she was blamed for her husband losing re-election in Arkansas because she kept her own maiden name. Where it was like, what are you going to... I mean, that was 1980, and after he lost his re-election bid in Arkansas, the press said it was because his wife wouldn't take his name, and that's when that was like, that for me was like the first moment in like the transformation into Darth Vader, is like the moment that like she then, and she writes about it with actually incredible candor in various places about that moment where she realized she had to become Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Okay, so we take that forward. She's learned those lessons because those are lessons society. But it not only takes that arrow out of her quiver, it forces her at that point to use an arrow maybe that she doesn't want to use, right? Which is like maybe being too optimistic in some respects. But if you can't differentiate one way because it's not available to you, part of the problem is it forces you to avail yourself of another option that is suboptimal. But leaving that aside, so going from there, let's talk about the Me Too thing, because it seems to me that Me Too was a sort of a surrogate for Donald Trump. Like the country did not hold this guy accountable for the obvious, because the difficulty is always like it's a he said, she said type of situation. And, we can't know what happens when two people shut the door or why, but in this instance, it was clear to everybody, right? There's like literally like tape. And it was the message to women that like, even when we don't have these evidentiary questions, even when we all know what the truth is, still not going to hold him accountable. It feels like Me Too came out of like, we couldn't get Donald Trump, but we can get other people. And I don't mean to be saying this like it was it was about time, but it was like there's an overdue debt of justice here, and we're going to go for that on some level. And what's your sense of that?
Well, yes and no. I think I agree. I think that I agree with you that, for example, I don't think the fall of 2017 hashtag Me Too movement, I don't think that it would have had the staying power or exploded in the way that it did had Donald Trump not been president. Right. On the other hand, I'm not sure which is the symptom and which is the right. I think Donald Trump himself, it's like, think of the number of men who, in fact, wound up facing repercussion during the 2017 hashtag Me Too movement. And we should say that, of course, the Me Too movement was founded by Tarana Burke in 2006, specifically to address sexual violence in communities of color. And the hashtag Me Too movement that was popularized in the fall of 2017 is an outgrowth of that movement, and it's a broader umbrella term to cover harassment and in a wide range of things. But I think that so many of the men, it wasn't just Donald Trump. Consider that Bill O'Reilly, like stories about Bill O'Reilly, I mean, he was sued. I wrote about a lawsuit against him for sexual harassment when I was a young journalist, probably in 2004.
Macris,
and yet he had
right?
Andrea Macris. And yet he kept his berth on television, a bajillion-dollar berth on television for all the intervening years. Consider Arnold Schwarzenegger. Stories about his groping had been on the record, and women had gone on the record with their names and talked about how he groped them, and he nonetheless got elected governor. Consider Roger Ailes. Stories about him had been published in Gabriel Sherman's book about him, and they had been poo-pooed by the New York Times, claimed, and nobody paid attention. He'd kept his, not only Bill O'Reilly and Roger Ailes, of course, not only kept their jobs and made millions of dollars, they also had the opportunity, given their births, to their media births and their platforms and the power that platform that they built had to basically contribute to the election of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
You know, Fox News created this president. They had so much power in addition to the wealth that they were garnering. They had so much power to control the political conversation. And this despite having been credibly and on the record accused of acts of harassment and assault. Then you had Donald Trump. Oh, and Bill Cosby. There were many stories, public stories with names, Andrea Constand's name attached to stories about Bill Cosby. And for more than a decade, for 12 years or something, he had continued to win Lifetime Achievement Awards, get new television deals, be hailed as a hero in some communities. So this is a buildup of, it's not just about Donald Trump. Trump was in combination with the political fury, in combination with the surprise that many people felt at this understanding that Hillary Clinton, this qualified woman, had just been passed over for this job, for this raging racist toddler. You know, the fact is that there had been an explosion of rage in the wake of the Access Hollywood tape, and that it had not prevented him from becoming the president was like, it was like a final straw, but it wasn't all about him, right? This is a pattern. This is the point, is that these men could be credibly accused by people, and it just didn't impede their rise to power or their further accrual of power. And it was like there was an anger that was so intense that when that story came out about Harvey Weinstein, it was like, we are not going to let this pass by. It was like a desire to hang on until these guys face repercussion. And I've never seen anything like that before. I've never lived through anything like that before. But it was like the fury. I don't think it was sure, imaginatively, it might have been a stand-in for Donald Trump, but it was also for its own purposes.
Right.
Like, no, we are not going to be chased out of telling these stories.
Trump was the sort of the final symptom in some ways that basically said, like, this is undeniable now, and you know we're going to treat it on some level. The other thing that occurs to me happened during that time, or at least, I think we've seen it both sort of publicly and certainly in the context of, privately, women I know have reassessed like their realities in some way, their histories, and now realize that there were relationships that they had, work relationships, whatever, non-work relationships where they were sexually harassed. They were in some fashion either suppressed or assaulted. That they
or that they've been complicit in it in somebody else's case. I mean, the whole reevaluation of once we get to the point, because if you live in a world in which all these guys and all the guys I just mentioned, right, and are getting elected president and governor and running TV networks and being hailed as heroes, and and you absorb the reality, which is that your experience of having been, assaulted by them or harassed by them or belittled or diminished or treated poorly by them just doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Nobody cares. And you really absorb that. And so when you have a Me Too movement, you have something like, as has happened over the past year, where there's an acknowledgement of the damage that this behavior has wrought, it's like you finally can open up that door in your own brain and your own memory, and all the stuff that you stuffed in there because what was going to happen, what was going to come of really thinking about it. There was so much evidence all around us that no one cared. It didn't matter. And then when you get a sort of invitation to
and that even it wasn't wrong,
it all pours out.
It wasn't even. It was like it was like an assessment of nothing wrong happened. Like, it's not even like there's something wrong that happened and no one's going to care. It was like that's just normal.
Right. That's just life. That's just normal. Yes.
So where if in the wake of Donald Trump, this anger, there was this sort of, not necessarily explosion of anger, but I guess this eruption of existing anger and assessment that we should be angry, and a different expression of it. I mean, tell me, like, do you think that there has been a lasting change, in the ability, and to what extent has there been a change in the ability of women to be angry in, relative to men, let's say, where, a men's anger is, it's just, you mentioned Pat Schroeder. If I remember correctly, the thing that really knocked her out of the race was that she cried. Like there was a moment where
she was announcing, when she cried, she was announcing that she wasn't going to run.
Okay.
So I don't know if it's quite right to say that that's what knocked her out, but that was the thing for which she became famous.
Yes, it was like the idea that she would cry in public. And then I feel like we've seen many examples of men cry in public, and it's like...
John Boehner never stopped crying.
Exactly. He was just... And it, it's impressive. It's impressive. He was able to do that. It took a lot of guts to cry in public for that guy. And... has the ability for women to be angry, because frankly, like, I'm thinking about Elizabeth Warren. I'm from Massachusetts. I'm a big fan of hers. When I talk to people in Massachusetts who I think should also be big fans of hers, like, I almost get a unilateral, I should say unanimous response, and I feel like it's a gendered response to when she gets angry, like she's a scold, and it's like, what?
Right. So the question of, are we making material change? I do think that we are making I think we are in the midst of changing our perceptions about how women can express themselves and be taken seriously. But we make a mistake, again, when we imagine that we can fix it quickly. This is hundreds of years, generation upon generation upon generation of conditioning, of social messaging around what's appropriate, around what tones are effective. This is, again, we talk about change in this country as if it's something that we can be quickly proud of having fixed. But in fact, when you're talking about a nation that was baked into its initial promises of equality and liberty, were structurally enforced inequality and inhumanity, you are talking about problems that take so long to fix, and that we have to be in the midst of probably inevitably for the rest of our lives. So I do think that there are changes that are being made around how I think if you look at the way that some of these new young women are moving into Congress, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Ayanna Pressley, the voices that they're using and the unwillingness to be sort of solicitous and polite, I think you're seeing that's a data point in terms of we're changing the register in which we can hear and respect and acknowledge as consequential certain kinds of women's voices. That's a huge set of changes we're seeing being wrought around that. I think that the fact that we're having conversations about how Hillary Clinton was heard, how Elizabeth Warren is heard, how Kamala Harris as an African-American woman is heard when she challenges Jeff Sessions or raises her voice as a prosecutor on a Senate Judiciary Committee. She and the ways that she gets characterized as hysterical or punitive or worrying in some way. Like, the fact that we're having these conversations is helping to change how we hear these women, but it's not something where we're ever in our lifetime that you or I is ever going to be able to say, like, well, now we love angry women. Like, it's not going to be that quick. It's a long, arduous, complicated, multifaceted process. And the thing I want this book to do more than anything, and people often understand it to be like a call to raise your voice in anger, and it's not that, actually, because there's so many ways in which women are punished in one way or another for offering loud challenge, right? So I would never encourage, if you're a woman of color who's pulled over by a cop for no reason, you have every reason in the world to be livid, but if you voice that fury, you risk your life, if you're a woman who is paid unequally in her office, you have every reason to be furious, but if you raise your voice about it in your office, you're going to get a reputation perhaps as difficult, or you're not going to get that raise, or you're going to get fired. There are real costs to that. So my book is not about not trying to encourage people to speak differently. It's to listen differently. It's to listen for these patterns. It's to listen to the patterns in our own head that write off women whose voices are raised in angry or disruptive dissent as, complicated or hysterical or too much. Stop, think, start listening to anger of marginalized people, including women, as instructive and diagnostic, as politically and socially potent. I want us to listen differently, to receive women's anger differently, and to watch for the patterns in which it is discounted and dismissed, and in our own heads and more broadly, and so that's part of the work of changing things, but that is going to be the work of our lifetime.
It's a long-term project to get people to listen differently, to hear it differently and whatnot. The other thing that has, I think, obviously come in the wake of this is that, and Thedescopel and Lena Putnam, I think it was, and even, the Intercept stories about what was happening on the ground showed, I think were indicative of a rising activism, and I think you mentioned, of women who had otherwise been maybe a reliable Democratic vote, maybe midterms, but now are running for office, are at the forefront of activist groups in terms of, particularly in the context of elections. I think just stumbled into multiple, essentially, groups of women who were organizing to send money to a state race in Colorado across the city. That energy you don't need. Is that what's your feeling about that engagement, that level of energy, where that's going to be within 5 or 10 years? I mean, if they're listening and getting society obviously to change their knee-jerk reactions to women's anger is a long-term project. What about that involvement? I mean, have there been a generation or two of women whose political engagement is forever implicated?
Well, I hope so. This is an open question, and it depends. This is why I get anxious when I hear this all just tied to Trump, because in part, I certainly hope that Trump is going to be gone soon, and in 2 years, or even if it's in 6 years. God, I hope not. Right. It's not, that's why I get anxious whenever somebody ties this directly to being about Donald Trump, because Donald Trump in this regard is absolutely symptomatic. He is the thing that has made the project of the American right wing evident, because he just says all the quiet parts loud. But if we attach it too much to Trump, then there'll be this myth, again, that pernicious but seductive myth that we fixed it. Oh, we got rid of Trump, it's done. But in fact, we know that it's not done, that his presidency was enabled by a party and by a set of ideologies and attitudes about who deserves to have power and who is permitted to participate equally and receive equal rights and equal protections in this country. That is, again, anger of a lifetime. Now, the question is, how many of those newly angry people will stay angry for the rest of their lifetimes? And that is up to those people, and including us. And I think that one of the big opportunities of this moment is, even if people are coming to the anger specifically, say, about Trump, I hope that part of what we're doing is having a conversation and in a period where people are really getting an education about all of the inequalities that are out there that require steady anger and vigilance and fight and commitment to being civic participants and political combatants, right? I think that the opportunity here is an education, and that's within progressive coalitions too, about the racism, the sexism, the inequality that exists within progressive coalitions. A lot of the conversations happening within a women's movement, this iteration of a women's movement, are about racism within that women's movement, and that's especially true for a lot of the suburban middle-class white women who are new to the anger. A lot of them are also learning about anger at them, because of the unequal amount of space they've taken up within progressive and feminist coalitions, while women of color, who often have been doing the groundbreaking intellectual and political work and have been the base of the Democratic Party for years, go underrepresented and their needs acknowledged and within that Democratic Party and any kind of left coalition. Those kinds of conversations, I hope, which are also rooted in anger that happens within a progressive coalition, I hope are going to reshape us so that the acknowledgement of the problems we have to solve go way beyond Trump. And I hope that it extends deep into our future. But we won't know until we get there. And this is a question, there will always be incentives for women, and particularly for white women who are adjacent to white, especially middle-class white men, there will always be incentives in place for them to quell their anger and to go back to being non-disruptors. And that is something that we have to be very attentive to, because there will be those messages that are put on offer.
Rebecca Traister, the book is Good and Mad, The Revolutionary Power of Women's Anger. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Welcome to... Are we back? All right, welcome back, everybody. The team is here. We're going to take you into the fun half, but first we're going to do about 30, 40 minutes of plugs for our respective programs. So sit tight. But first, of course, become a member of the Majority Report, majority.fm/become a member. It is merely pennies a day to serve this 5-day-a-week news and analysis program. That really is quite a feat. Anytime I was talking to a friend, I guess for lack of a better word, in the biz the other day, and he was just like, "You guys do this 5 days a week. That's an unbelievable amount of work."
We do it more than anybody.
We do. The smallest 5-day news team in the country, with
by certain measurements,
in a certain sense. It's very, very very left, very strong analysis. Anyways, we are responsible, even with the advertising. Over 90% of it comes from you, and that makes us responsible to you. Become a member today. JustCoffee.coop. Get the deal. It's on the site. January tickets are sold out for the Majority Report show. We are more than halfway sold out of the February 1st Michael Brooks show. And I'm going to start talking to you about some of the things we're going to be doing, including a pre-recorded Dave Rubin, Sam Harris sketch. Alona Minkowski is going to be there. Bhaskar Sunkar is going to be there. Trevor Beaulieu is going to be there. Get your tickets today for the February 1st Bell House show on our website. Tonight on TMBS, we're doing a dive connecting the barbarism at the border today, the caravan, and the 2009 Obama administration, Clinton State Department backed coup in Honduras, the removal of Manuel Zelaya, how that connects with a broader U.S.-backed reversal of the pink tide.
Don't vote.
Don't complain, coup. If Manuel Zelaya's compromising your coffee fields with higher minimum wage for workers, I don't see, don't come here and complain.
Don't raise the minimum wage.
Yeah.
Coup.
Don't raise the minimum wage. Have a coup. Then hire some creep like Lonnie Davis that has some type of bizarre incestuous relationship with Hillary to lobby for it. And then Vanessa A.B., she is for current affairs. She just was in France. We're talking sort of ground-up perspective of the Yellow Vest movement. And then it ties together with an interview that is, obviously very important to me with Valeska Martins, who is one of the lead defense counsels for political prisoner Lula da Silva. And we will talk about lawfare, that case, the U.S. role, and it will link with Honduras. And then, of course, the post-game. Thursday, we're doing another live TMBS show because we're off next week, and Big Wozni Lambre is going to be in studio. Looking forward to that very much. Jamie, what's going on?
All right. So last week on the Antifada, we had a pretty serious episode where we took apart some of the anti-immigration faux populist arguments being made by Angela Nagel, Tucker Carlson, and more in the hopes of arming people with facts and logic that they can use to own whoever they're arguing with or just for their own edification. So this week, we recorded a very silly episode with Alex Patak of fellow goth socialist podcast Pod Damn America, which you were on recently, right, Michael?
I just was on. Yes, I forgot to mention that. We did it. It was the name of the show is Lula Lads, and I had a really fun time with Jake Flores and those guys, and I like the phrase Lula Lads very much.
Yeah, they're awesome,
good guys.
nice,
Check
funny guys.
Yes.
So we did a show with Alex Patak, and we talked about many things. We talked about how Teen Vogue is leftist now, and Penthouse is like some kind of alt-light IDW publication. Did you know about this?
I didn't even know Penthouse still existed.
Oh, it exists.
I did know my friend Samita Mukhopadhyay, I think, is at Teen Vogue, and she's got some very legit politics.
Yeah, Teen Vogue has been really good lately. Like, you could read a primer on like anarchism right next to an article about like lip gloss or the Jonas Brothers or whatever teenage girls like now.
Let's wait till they get bought by some shadowy group and then laid off like a day later. Knock on wood.
It's time
Keep up the fight, Teen Vogue.
Yeah.
Yeah, solidarity.
Thanks for the optimism. Unionize as quickly as possible.
Yeah, be vigilant.
Seriously.
And apropos of nothing, Jonathan Chait is a scab in his soul.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We talked about that too.
Oh, you did? You talked about the New York Magazine
Yeah, we talked about how the
awesome.
New York Magazine unionized,
Very
and Jonathan Chait is, of course, crying about it like the little scab he is. And you know what? If the New York Magazine Union wants to bring back social unionism, where unions are fighting for the good of society and not just themselves, they will make firing Jonathan Chait one of their demands.
Yeah, if the union's bad for Jonathan Chait, it sounds like a pretty good union.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like another reason to love the union.
For real.
All right, awesome. The Antifada. Check it out on iTunes and Patreon.
Yeah, people can still check out the Democracy in Chains episode, although they might have already, because that's one of my best performing ones.
It was very good. I, if I may, an editorial suggestion. I think semi-regularly doing valuable left-wing books that have. I think a Stephen Jay Gould thing. Maybe that could be a joint TMBS literary hangover, but that guy needs to be retrieved because he was really positive and really important and smeared by very awful people.
Oh, is he the IQ stuff guy? Is he...
IQ, Harvard, I think he was a paleontologist. Anyways,
yeah, right.
He was trashed by a guy named Nicholas Wade, who was a New York Times reporter that wrote a book that like he sort of wrote like the kind of genetic racist book that like the other people that want to make sort of similar arguments are like, yeah, but not like that. Mm-hmm. That guy's book was actually pretty racist. Right. Like a real trash piece of writing. And he was a reporter behind a lot of this revisionism around Stephen Jay Gould. It's a very important story.
Yeah.
You know, Jacobin has a good piece about it people should check out. But anyways, go ahead. Sorry.
It's
a great episode.
Yeah, coming up, I'm going to release one on Anne Bradstreet, who people might know as the first published poet in America. She was also one of the first pundits. She wrote a poem, a dialogue between Old England and New about the English Civil War, written in 1642 at the time, and then published in 1650. So she talks a lot about it, and it's very interesting because she mentions like commons and like let's.
She talks about the commons,
but she's not a pro-com. She is pro-commoner, but like also like pro-land owner because she's like her dad was literally governor of Massachusetts Bay 4 times. And then but there's some good sentiments like there's like a let's abolish prisons because all this sectarian strife is why we have prisons in the first place, and then it turns to a really interventionist let's go to Turkey and Rome and get these papists out, and just like we did in Palestine like 100 years earlier. So yeah,
she's like Hillary Clinton.
It is very like imperial feminism, American feminism thing.
This stuff goes way back.
All right, folks. See you in the fun half.
It's a nice feeling. It's real. It's a nice feeling. Sweetheart, get me a beer. I totally get it. They are. You turn on the TV, some iteration of me. Zero-sum game. It's a nice feeling. Zero-sum game. Zero-sum game. It's a nice feeling. You're gonna lose your status. He's the king of his zero-sum game. I totally get it. Zero-sum game. They are. Zero-sum game. Sweetheart, get me a beer.
Nice. Welcome to. Am I up now? Welcome to the fun half. Michael Brooks and the crew. Everybody's here. I really thought very well timed transition music there. Super producer Matt.
Yeah, I know.
I have to say, I'm not gonna I think we've litigated zero sum enough, and there isn't actually that much daylight there. But especially distilled in that song, I have to say, like, my original argument of like, I don't think this is how we should be framing our politics. I'm gonna say it stands. You're gonna lose. Do you see?
It's fun.
I don't think that's how you go to the masses.
That one we don't play as much because it's not long.
It's not long, but he's great.
But it is very funny to hear Sam say, "Get me a beer, sweetheart.
Sweetheart,
get me
a beer." It's a zero-sum game. It's a nice feeling. He says, "Oh God, that's amazing." Okay, folks, let's take the first call. We're not warning to everybody. We're definitely we got to be done a bit on the earlier side today, which actually means, which is ending at a normal time, not these like radically expanded hours we've been going on. You're calling from a 775 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Reverend Aaron from Punks for Progress.
Hey, what's going on?
Not a whole lot. I wanted to talk to you. I'm so glad that you're actually hosting, Michael.
Oh.
Because I want to talk about deplatforming a little bit.
Okay.
Because I got to hang up with this issue.
Okay.
So I should say I don't have a real, strong stance on it either way, although I am leaning more towards deplatforming of fascism being a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to kind of, before we get into it, point out that there's a difference between what me and my comrades and others did over the last year or two in Berkeley in organizing counter demonstrations against like Ben Shapiro and Milo's so-called Free Speech Week. I don't see those as the same thing, and they get lumped into the deplatforming argument a lot.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you can elaborate, but I think protest is part of the same process of free speech, which I actually believe in pretty strongly. So I agree with you.
Excellent. So I'm glad we sort of established that.
Mm-hmm.
But then the other side of it, so Kyle Kowinski just recently put up a video where he's really adamant about the sort of slippery slope argument of deplatforming fascism, ultimately hurting us, right?
Yep.
And I'm open to this argument. Now, I have a small platform. We don't ask for money. My income is not reliant on it, so I don't have as much, flesh in the game as people like you or Kyle do. Okay.
Right.
But I haven't seen the evidence yet. So Kyle cites It's Going Down, which is a fantastic media outlet if people want to check out true anarchist critique and perspective. They're amazing. It's just Going Down.
I listen to them all the time.
Pulled down. Yeah, they're incredible. And they've even done stuff for our platform, and they're just amazing for the community. And they were piled on, I don't know, year and a half or so ago by alt-righters because they were doing such a great job of supporting Antifa, and they got pulled down off Patreon. Now, I don't know if they've been reestablished or not, but this is the example that Kyle uses as the slippery slope if we're going to be bringing down, Sargon and, InfoWars and all these other people. And I don't see that connection. And I know that you are definitely very hesitant and skeptical of any type of deplatforming. And so I really, and most of the time that you've brought it up on the show, Michael, you're kind of like, look, this is kind of how I see it. I don't want to get into it, bam, and then you're kind of out. And I'm interested in.
I don't really want to get into it. Bam, I'm out. Okay. All right. Well, I do have two points I'll make on this, but first, I genuinely want to ask you. I mean, because I feel like it's. How do you not see the connection there? Right. Like to me, the connection is really linear. I can answer that pretty easily, it's linear. Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, the premise for why in this situation It's Going Down would have had their issue is a dishonest premise. It wasn't based on their actual activity and things that they were espousing. It was that so many right-wingers had piled on and lied about their messaging.
I'm not making a moral. But let me just take it here for a second, right? So I am not ever going to trust Patreon or Twitter or any of these platforms. And some of them might have better organizational cultures than others. So whatever, we can make some distinctions potentially. But I am not for a second going to trust the nuance and disaggregating abilities of any of these companies to make the distinction you're talking about. So stipulate that I agree with you as a moral claim, though, Sargon and It's Going Down are totally different moral propositions. But the process by which a skittish company that wants to avoid controversy and will make a business decision to avoid it, and its broader implications on these crowd-funded platforms, it's a very direct link there. So turnabout is going to be fair play. So that's what I mean. I'm not making any type of actual.
Right. No, I completely.
There's no
understand.
actual equivalency. I'm talking about these companies and how they operate.
So if I understand you correctly, it's you're saying, okay, people like Sargon and Lauren Southern and these other people have been deplatformed for really gross behavior.
Particularly
is bad for their business model.
Right.
Right. I mean, we want them brought down because we see that they have a real-time influence on a lot of ignorant minds that end up electing, a big giant orange Cheeto, right? And so it has real-time effects in the world. So that's why I'm into deplatforming, because it terrifies me that their message gets out to people.
Yeah,
so here are my other. Let me just and then I'll just throw it out because I'll answer what you're saying, and then everybody will jump in on this because I know there's a lot of thoughts on this.
Sure.
So, and part of it, I just want to hear what everybody has to say one at a time because it's important, and I don't know all the answers, obviously, and I want to learn. But there's my broader. Okay, so the broader thing. And this is, let's kind of put it into three buckets. So my first one is just the business of these platforms and what the tendencies you're creating. So as an example, one conversation I had many years ago, but it was a really smart sort of distinction, and this is much less serious, but it was like the whole college, and this was actually a left-wing critique of comedians complaining about colleges. And the point was, though, is it isn't that there's leftist or subversive comedy getting sponsored by college campuses. It's that all of these campus activity committees, as one might expect from the type of student that would want to be in a campus activity community, no offense, but you know what I'm saying, is to book performers that aren't going to offend anybody and aren't going to do anything that might disrupt anybody's sensibility. And I think that potentially could be the trend line on some of these platforms. And I do think that if, controversy is your concern, and again, I'm thinking about profit-making companies that are not making obvious moral and political distinctions, that is going to have implications for not only fascists, but also socialists and anarchists. Okay, so that's the business concern. The other concerns I have are, I think that there is sometimes a culture on the left that has gone so quickly to that position versus actually winning fights, whether they're, figurative, maybe even literal, but I'm focusing on figurative. So as an example, a couple years ago, Doug Lane tells the story. His son at University of Oregon, they did a really important demonstration at a meeting of administrators to protest tuition hikes. It's one of the most important things students could protest about. And the administration cracked down hard. We're going to kick you out of school type of hard, right? Now, their response was, to a lot of the organizers, their response was not to, call the press, dig in their heels, not only are we right about this issue, now we're literally getting threatened to have our lives seriously materially harmed for exercising our rights. Some not insignificant number of people pivoted to, well, there are these anti-abortion protesters who don't get in trouble for their protests on campus, and if we're going to get in trouble, they should get in trouble. disaster, right? Like the administration is going, sure, we would be happy to police and monitor and control as many students as possible, right? And again, obviously, I'm trusting people in the audience to understand, and it's annoying that I even have to say this, but I know that there's always like the, people who are like intentionally not going to understand things or are literalists. This obviously is not an embrace of anti-choice politics in any way, shape, or form. It was to say that pivot is a big problem, to not go on like, wait a second, we're staying exactly on this issue and you're not going to suppress us, to, well, why aren't these other students getting into trouble? Like this kind of like tattletale self-policing thing. And I think that is a big,
it's like, why didn't the police shoot the white woman with the rock?
We don't want the police to shoot anybody. Precisely. That's the liberatory argument.
And it was wrong that they shot the black person in the first place. So don't distract us with this argument of the white woman with the rock.
Well, and there is totally, by the way, there's absolutely a tendency I could see in certain sectors of criminal justice reform where they'll say like, you know what, you're totally right about this. There are these really unfair racial and structural disparities, and our answer is going to be, we're going to incarcerate even more people to even out the stats. Not, we're going to get rid of this system that is horrible, full stop, and obviously disproportionately affects people of color. Exactly. So I think that's a really big problem. I had one other point, but I guess I'll just sort of leave it there. I think, I guess it's sort of attached to the third point, is I do think at times, I definitely think that there are some people. Okay, I think let me make a distinction. I think Milo, because Milo is, as far as I understand it, was specifically promising to dox and expose people who were transgender on his tour in a way that could jeopardize their well-being. So stopping that is a fundamentally different thing, because you're protecting somebody's well-being, right? So that takes on a completely different equation. Ben Shapiro being a little smug asshole at your campus, I would say if Ben Shapiro had been primarily ignored, or people had gone to his appearances and just been cool, calm, and collected and mocked him, I don't think he would have half the career he has.
I mean, that's what happens in most of the times that he appears in places, though. Like, there's all these stories of they were expecting trouble at this speech. Somebody made a huge thread about this, and it turned out like, no, nothing happened.
Well, not actual trouble, but look, there's enough material he's been given for 1 million montages to feed his brand. So on just a very practical,
where a lot of that comes from, because I'll tell you, Michael, I helped organize one of the main demonstrations against him at Berkeley.
Right.
And what went down there was the positive you were just describing.
Okay.
And anyone that got there and was complete, would do the things that we would be embarrassed or shudder from or understand could be used against us would have been squashed instantly. And
then that's just his team.
It really was
creating
great
propaganda
and speeches and people from the old civil rights movement that were talking.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's his team creating propaganda. Then I do think, honestly, in some of these
I guess in the end, man, I'm open to see the reality and the possibility that there could be the slippery slope with deplatform. I think what I'm asserting at this point is I just haven't seen it yet. And again, so with the It's Going Down versus alt-right model, It's Going Down didn't do things that then got the attention of Patreon.
Haven't Antifada accounts been removed from Patreon? I mean, isn't that
Antifa?
Excuse me. Yeah, and listen,
I hope
that's
the
problem.
No, I hope not to. I don't want to put that out to the universe. This
gets to your argument about not trusting the business that's running this stuff, because the distinction being, I'm hoping, I guess, which is maybe kind of misguided, that they would understand. Okay, look. You brought down It's Going Down because of lies. You brought down Sargon because of things he actually did.
I think
that there's something in that argument.
I don't think so. I think you're not going to. I would never depend on a Silicon Valley company making adjudications like that, and I think ever.
Well, no, I think what I'm depending on is I'm not seeing any reason I should stop supporting the deplatforming of fascism. I'm not seeing that.
I mean, look, all I'm saying is that
if I see that
that's the new game
to a leftist side, it would be different.
you know what the real play might end up being is that we are going to, on some of these platforms that aren't totally monopolized, there might end up being a left-wing Patreon and a fascist Patreon, and we're going to have to migrate into these different business models.
They already have Hatreon, don't they?
I think so.
Yeah, but those things are always going to run into trouble with payment providers and stuff.
Well,
you
they're
fundamentally need to run on
that's
some sort of infrastructure.
that's actually right, and I think that's maybe right. That's a more. What I'm saying though is if you have two different platforms that say like, okay, we are providing for different types of politics, then and that's also scary too, frankly. But I think like a payment platform, because of the way their business is run, is going to be more likely to basically be saying like they stopped processing Gavin McInnes stuff because they're scared that there's even a 1% chance that there's organized criminal activity going on. That's not because of somebody giving an interview. So that already becomes a completely different metric that you're measuring by. So, but as long as these things are in the hands of like a Patreon, no, I don't think it's a smart strategy.
This is the problem. This is why I always try to move this conversation onto monopoly, because I don't think you can win on actually having this conversation outside of it. Because if there was no monopoly, I would take my business to a left-wing platform that balances this correctly, right? Like it ices out the fascists and is favorable to left-wingers. I think I could run a Patreon like that fairly well now if you wanted to, but I'm not in charge of Patreon. And the other thing people need to realize with Patreon and the Sargon stuff is they realize and they're conscious about the fact that they're not just monetizing the content that gets put on Patreon, right? Somebody could subscribe to Literary Hangover if they just liked what I do on this show. They would never even have to listen to the...
Well, they said that in their statement.
Right, and that's...
They basically said, like, look, we check out, especially what our top performers do on different platforms.
And that was always going to happen, and that's going to be an increasing site of risk. And I mean, the problem is that I think that continuing to encouraging these things will lead so like left wing things get cut too.
100%.
I think that's why the right wing likes to play the like. Well, if you're going to let us in, then or if you're going to let them in, then you have to let us in. And if you're going to let us out, we're going to make a hassle out of this XXX
and
example.
There's always going to be, for the foreseeable future, as we work to change it, there's going to be a structural advantage on the right in those dynamics.
Yeah, and I think, I think I understand what he's saying about now. Like, I think Sargon and Milo, like, yeah, fuck them. But I am genuinely, like, I don't want to pour any more gas on the fire as far as that goes.
I don't think it's a wise strategy. And I even think, whatever. I think we can also, frankly, if you want to, you can also parse. I think Milo is in some ways a very easy one to parse, even in his tours, because he was specifically talking about doing an actionable thing to students, as far as I understand. And it already becomes a totally different thing than, frankly, even somebody like Sargon. The guy's a fucking jackass. Take him on. Use him as an example to undermine the brand. It's so easy.
Yeah, but if I ran a company like Patreon,
look, that's
I would
the
kick him off
marketplace
too.
of ideas thing. And here's
well,
my
you would, of
issue
course
with the
you would,
marketplace
because
of
it's
ideas will
a
win.
business,
Right.
and I agree with you, but that's not a durable strategy. But as soon as they've dumped enough money to make it so that enough PragerView videos have been taken literally by enough people that even saying the word socialism is going to lead to, China, a cultural revolution that's going to kill people. You as a business will go away from any controversy. You as a business, until the backlash to what happened to Sam became so unbelievably overwhelming, your first instinct would be, you know what? I don't understand all of this. It's too complicated. I get that, this guy is of uncredible source, but the tweet's controversial. You know what? I don't want to deal with it. That's what businesses do.
But
someone with a smaller platform could have been destroyed by that.
Dude, if someone, there is no doubt that somebody with a smaller platform would have been destroyed by that. Most people, if that happened to somebody with a smaller platform, they would not have every single entertainment figure and pundit.
If it happened to somebody who hadn't been platforming a lot of different journalists at a lot of different major publications and media.
100%. 100%. So as long as we're in the market game, it's not a smart play.
I guess
that's my view.
The point.
Can I say what I think about this too? Sure.
With the monopolization thing, I'm saying like if we weren't in this context of monopolization and I was just running a Patreon, I would still kick off Sargon for explicitly his political beliefs, and I wouldn't run somebody who speaks like that.
But you would be setting a different company up, which is what we're talking about. Which is like, I want my Patreon is committed to socialist, anarchist, cool content.
Exactly.
You're some weird, fucking bigoted idiot from Britain. No, thank you.
So you talk about monopolization instead, right?
Sure. And that's the monopolization and innovation. Right. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with some of what you guys have said and disagree with other parts of it. I do think it speaks to the need for real left-wing platforms, because I also do not trust Patreon or any evil tech company really to adjudicate these things. I also agree that we need to pick our battles and be smart about it and know where to draw the line between a real fascist who poses either clear and present danger to people or like just spreading a violent ideology that leads very directly to violence, like we've seen with the Proud Boys, who have actually put people in the hospital fairly recently, and know when you're just playing into people's hands and when you're not. But like, okay, I used to be much more of a free speech absolutist than I am right now. But over time, like as I've gotten more and more information about this stuff, I've kind of changed my mind. Because first of all, like if you provide a neutral platform, we're not on equal footing in the marketplace of ideas, right? Some ideas have a lot more money and power behind them than others. So if I don't think any platform is truly going to be neutral, and I do think they have the responsibility to at least try to be smart about who they're featuring and who they're not. And like, we got to use all the tools in our toolbox, And I used to think that deplatforming and protesting people was pointless because it didn't work. But I've seen it work a bunch of times. Like it really hurt Alex Jones. It really hurt Mike Cernovich, Gavin McInnes. Like they're pissed off about it. And fewer people are being polluted with their white nationalist garbage as a result. Also, there's no rule, there's no law that says the right and the left have to be treated equally. Right. So like the slippery slope argument where, it would be so easy once you set this precedent to use it against the left, that there's no equivalence there.
But which side's capital?
I mean, I'm not talking about more. I'm talking in terms of power. Obviously, it's going to be used against the left. I mean, it already is. And in fact, a more practical, just to add to this, because we always talk about like the easy ones, okay? But on Facebook, in response to a lot of pushes on these issues, okay, Alex Jones, Gavin McInnes, massive impacts on websites like Brazil Wire, the Atlantic Council, which is a center-right to neocon think tank, is advising Facebook on Latin America content and on foreign policy. And it's already had a massive impact on independent adversarial journalism on U.S. foreign policy. And there is absolutely, not only is it going to favor the right in terms of where capitals will go, it is, I mean, that's not even slippery slope. It already is, barring a couple of top line personalities that we all focus on. The structural creep of what already is getting flattened and moved out of the discourse is on the left. And that's for obvious reasons that, of course, capital will favor the right. So I just think, like, look, it's both a bad play because of the context we're in, and I also think we shouldn't lose sight too of, the other facets of this as well, which is that like these people can be out and we can defeat them and beat them, and we don't have to kind of play that cop hall monitor role.
Here's the thing though. They're going to do that to the left no matter what the left does
I don't
to the
know.
right.
I don't know about that.
They are.
Well,
they do and they will.
But what's the evidence for that? Like, we have actual evidence of how these things are working. We need to respond to like what the actual evidence is versus like, you could be right But that's not what the reality is now. So the reality, I feel like
you don't think that they would keep trying to deplatform It's Going Down if the left stopped trying to deplatform Gavin McInnes? Because I think they absolutely would.
I think it's possible.
And one thing
but
about
I know
the right
what is
that is smart is they use absolutely every tool in their toolbox, and they don't have conversations like this unless it's in a totally disingenuous way that only benefits
But
themselves.
I guess the problem is you're sharpening the tools for them.
Right. You're giving them a
don't
tool.
agree.
They have more tools. They have more advantages. And your hand, again, we don't operate in an idealized world. I'm having the conversation as if it's already baked in that they have structural advantages.
I think
that's a given.
I think they invented this and the left has picked it up, because the vast majority of instances where people have been harassed, deplatformed, forced to leave their jobs, it's been for expressing left-wing views.
I mean, my worry and I think the examples of Sargon and Gavin and Milo being deplatformed, I think it has damaged their careers and probably
definitely
minimized their ability to damage society. But I worry that the availability of those case studies is overshadowing things like the Crimes of Britain accounts that get shut down, or the Telesur getting
the Telesur. I mean, it's the classic the headlines tell. Look at these companies, they're cracking down on the alt-right. But the structural instruments that are being put into place, from the Google algorithm searches to Facebook, certainly Twitter accounts. In fact, Twitter accounts still are, there's satiric left-wing personalities that have been banned, and Richard Spencer is still on. So the top line is that even in this, it's already being lost on the left. So maybe the most practical answer is, and there's conversations that people are having about this that maybe will come out down the road, is really just being there needs to be, at least on the Patreon level, some type of explicitly left platform.
Absolutely.
I
agree with that too. And here's
stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
And if you have these sort of different, Patreon sort of services or personal services, they're not normalized by being on the same platform as everybody else. So it's oh, come on, this was how Milo got as far as he did. It's he's just, he's not that bad. And look, he's on this thing and he's talking on that thing and he's on. We're sharing this space with them. If people have to go to the place that says, in their mission statement, we're totally good with neo-Nazis and liars, then people know that going on.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And I also just want to say, too, that another reason that Milo got really punctured was because of also just that BuzzFeed report on Milo is, there was the comment that people dug up, the pedophilia thing, which I don't remember, but that was one. And to be honest with you, my read on that was that he was already on the way out anyways.
That was a Dean scream.
Yeah, they would have run interference for him, because that's exactly the type of comment that he would make and say ooh, I was just joking, get away with. So I don't know about that. But the BuzzFeed report that actually was all right, this isn't speculative. This is the pipeline. This is the piece in Breitbart. This is how they would advise actual active white nationalists. This is how it gets reframed and laundered for, that was devastating, because it shut down a whole spectrum of the conduit bullshit conversations from people like Dave Rubin, who'd be just ideas. And then it was okay, this is the actual idea process. And that was, that was frankly just journalism and analysis. I think that really pinned them.
And it destroyed their entire sort of finely tuned dog whistle narrative.
Exactly.
That was so careful to not be racist and fascist and bigoted. But, you just scrape the surface a little bit, and it just ripped the whole thing off. And it had, a total ripple effect, because now we can apply that rubric to other people. Look, his rhetoric is exactly the same things that Milo was saying. So obviously he's, that's what Sargon told shtick. He was recently, I heard him on a Kevin Logan podcast. And they ripped him apart, calling him names, tore his argument apart repeatedly, and were totally disrespectful to him.
Nice.
It was really fun.
Sounds like other people are following my lead into how to debate.
Well, sure. Well, but he came away from it he took all the jabs, all the gender-specific name-calling at him and all this stuff, and came away I can take it because I'm in the marketplace of ideas. So it was it was fun to watch him just get ripped apart, but he just laughed it off.
Right.
And so that's, again, where that BuzzFeed article is so important, because he's not an honest actor. Sargon isn't debating issues. Give me a fucking break.
100%.
I'll use this issue to sell
100%.
this other lie.
And for what it's worth, and this is where it's the last thing I'll say, I think where there's value in defending like the actual liberal bougie values that anybody who I think is just even contextually honest, like if you're, in your early 30s in the United States of America, even in a radically changed political situation, you're going to want to preserve some of these things that we call bourgeois or whatever the hell. And frankly, I think for what it's worth, the Milo case is actually an example of the most potent thing that really destroyed him was aggressive, smart, First Amendment-enabled investigative journalism. And that's when he was totally destroyed. That was when the book company dropped his book, and now he's a joke. So
I don't know. I feel like these
Thanks for the call, man.
These liberal media platforms who still think that they can be neutral and provide an equal amount of time to these people, they need to wake up, because throughout history, we've seen fascists do not respect their liberal values, and they're going to use any platform they're given against them.
No doubt. Richard Spencer, we played a clip of him a year and a half ago. He said, we'll use it, and then we get in power, we get rid of the First Amendment.
Yeah.
absolutely.
So like, he doesn't care about free speech.
Of course
and
not.
I realized
I do.
Yeah. And I realized that most of these companies are more likely to break for the right than the left when push comes to shove, but they should be a little smarter than that about it, because the fascists are not on their side.
Well, unlike you, as a socialist versus anarchist, I have no trust in the companies having that intelligence.
I'm not a full anarchist. I'm a communist with anarchist leanings.
Just an update on the IDW Patreon exodus, though.
Right. They're not doing it.
Well, Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin are still on Patreon.
Hell yeah, of course they are. We actually need to think really seriously about this, because I'm actually making stupid money.
What am I supposed to do? You mean maybe we should have had the replacement set up, guys?
So there's a really interesting question, which is, so Sargon does an interview, and it's time to do an exile, but
Carl Jung was with Ezra Pound and Alan Dulles in Switzerland once, and they were like, we just have $30,000 coming in a month. Should we just walk away from that?
Yeah, and of course the answer is no. I mean, that would be chaos. So what do you do?
Is you socialists?
I mean, Sam Harris gets to shut down his Patreon because he's literally like, I mean, this is material interest, okay? I have look, Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson definitely make more money than they should make in my estimation, but they are not trust fund babies as far as I understand. Sam Harris can do the Patreon flourish because he is literally like Scrooge McDucking in Golden Girls money. Okay, like he can do that little play. Dave Rubin, I mean, I'm sure he gets plenty of corporate money, but I think he does have actual patrons, and part of his budget is actually like, oh, I need this.
He's got 3,200 patrons.
Yeah, so that's real.
I also find it telling that the thing that really turned the right against Milo was him talking, granted in a very flippant way, about something that I've heard a lot of my gay male friends talk about, which was, oh yeah, my first sexual experience was with an older dude. And, maybe that was a little creepy on his part, but I feel okay about it. And this is a thing. And conservatives were like, oh, no, we can't have that. Because I knew at the end of the day, they were going to reject him for being gay, not for being a fascist or whatever.
I didn't follow that story very much, but I do recall, to echo what you're saying, that when I heard that clip, it was like, yes, it was like, first of all, if you had friends like that are gay men, it wasn't such an entirely shocking thing to hear necessarily. And it was also like, there were some things he said around it, as I recall, that were actually really gross, that weren't just that. But I do remember being like, this dude said like literally hundreds of things that are worse than this.
It came off to me like him joking about his childhood sexual assault, like to almost to feel better about it.
Yeah. It was probably one of course, on the alt-right, the most like humanizing, potentially controversial thing you'd say would be what would get you? What is it?
I've got 7,451 patrons.
A lot of patrons, so yeah. Maybe if Sargon ate less French fries, he would be in a different shape.
What is it?
A different comedy podcast has 9,000 something.
Oh, nice. I was all right. Patreon.com/TMBS. So I think yeah. I mean, no. I think we covered a lot of it. Speaking of which, Dave Rubin did this interview. It's not on the sheet. What is this gentleman's name that Dave Rubin interviewed? It's Imam Tawaldi, I think he is. And he's based in Australia. And
it's where all the best imams go.
All the best imams.
Imam Tahidi.
Imam Tahidi. Now, I've tried to read about this guy because it's like he basically tweets out like the most far right, ultra extreme, anti-Muslim, anti-immigrant. Do you have some examples of things he's tweeted?
Yeah.
Give us a flavor of this imam's tweets.
This is just, it's a picture of Tommy Robinson.
Who's a British anti-Muslim fascist guy.
It said, if Tommy Robinson had looked like this, his right to free speech will be protected. And I'm just going to put this in front of Michael's camera.
Okay, it's a Muslim man with a beard.
It's Tommy Robinson photoshopped to be wearing Muslim garb.
That's awesome. All right, so basically, like, what I'm trying to say here, though, is as you can even get by that tweet, and maybe we'll have a few others. This isn't like Nawaz, Majid Nawaz, like plausible deniability, sort of like pseudo-intellectual liberalism, counterterrorism talk. This isn't just sort of like the middle brow neocon to neoliberal with some conspiracies sprinkled in that you get from Majid. This is like the most pure, like even the most self-critical, like maybe Ayn Hirsi Ali might occasionally say something like this, although she's not as dumb. And she's also like, I'm not a Muslim. Like, I'm done with it. I hate Islam. I'm not into it. There is no person who is going to still wear religious garb and be an imam who is just like, we're just horrible. And any far right, any conspiracy theory, any xenophobia, anything I'm going to endorse on Twitter because ironically, or maybe not that ironically, all of these right-wing idiots that follow me actually are pure credulous essentialists who are not able to discern anything. So let's just get to the clip. It's fine. We can deal with it after. That clip. It's ready. Let's play that clip. So, of course, this guy, zero credibility. So where would you go? You go to the zero credibility zone itself. Dave Rubin.
At least because, in Iraq, we had the same situation. How did ISIS get in? ISIS got into Iraq because certain politicians played the diversity game. Why have borders with Saudi Arabia? Why have a wall? Just let the deserts be open. And then these cars came in from around the world and they took over 40 minutes away from Baghdad. I mean, then politicians, when they're...
Okay, so, and Dave Rubin's just like, sitting there just like, well, like, do you think back when Jesus was around, were the Muslims that he spent time with nicer?
Wait, those working conditions that you're going to build a wall across the Saudi Arabian desert, what are those going to be like?
Yeah, there's going to be a lot. You guys have a lot of spring water, I bet. Yeah, you ready? You got the spring water for the people? So, I mean, I don't even know. I mean, that's just so catastrophically basically, he's talking about ISIS incursions in Iraq in, I think, 2014. Now, there was a pretty strong border between Iraq and its neighbors when Iraq wasn't warring with its neighbors under Saddam Hussein. And the first sort of foreign invasion in the modern era of Iraq that, I guess one way of putting it would be opened up its borders was, of course, the U.S.-UK mass bombardment and invasion and occupation of that country. I mean, this is the type of talking point that I have to, I'm trying to get more amenable to debating and reasoning everything out. But if you think that that's a credible statement, you're almost as dumb as Dave Rubin. Do we have any more tweets from this guy? Okay, so basically, this guy, any cursory, and there's all sorts of questions about his religious credentials and where he comes from. This is the Tommy Robinson. This is the Tommy Robinson tweet. Imam Tawaldi. If Tommy looked like this, his right to free speech would have been protected.
Fuck Tommy Robinson.
Yeah, fuck Tommy Robinson. All right, yeah, you want to? What's the one that says exposed? Yeah, let's see what the exposed. Oh, I don't know what this is. When you call terrorism is what you call terrorism is called God's law in Saudi Arabia and Iran. There's always a special budget for God's law in any Islamic government. So
Islam memes.
Yeah, this is a great grift. It's a great business.
The right does not know how to meme.
This is a great business.
Oh, I saw a funny what are those not the deal with it, but the
Free Tommy Robinson. Okay, so basically, the question for somebody like this, to be honest, is going to be how far the laundering goes, because Dave Rubin, obviously, he has no editorial standards. He's not bright. He's totally credulous. Has Sam Harris embraced this guy yet? That's a question. Does it move up the food chain? Does this guy have a Bill Maher segment where Bill Maher's like, and what I don't understand is the Muslims. The thing is that's in some ways the way to watch Dave Rubin is he swims in the sewage, and then he's sort of like a sewage scout for kind of the soft alt-right or just sort of general anti-Muslim whatever nonsense and conspiracy theories.
I think Sam Harris might have tweeted about him, but I'm blocked, so I can't really read it. I'll put it in the sound poll. The tweet that I can read is Sam Harris saying, "This was remarkably honest and refreshing. Why aren't most imams like this?" But I'm not 100% sure.
Well, that's him.
It's him.
He's tweeting. There you go. So Sam Harris is on the grift then, if that's him. Yeah. Sam Harris, no, he's not even in on the grift. Sam Harris is in on the delusion. That's how you should look at it. This is a guy that you hold up as having some type of extraordinary intellect. And, oh my God. That's what he quote tweeted.
That's what Sam Harris thought.
Remarkable honesty.
Refreshing.
All right.
Wow.
I promise future segments on who this Imam for Peace really is.
We thought it was a Sacha Baron Cohen.
We literally,
season 2.
Yeah, I thought it was a Sacha Baron Cohen character too.
Maybe he is. Maybe it's a long con.
Remarkable honesty. Thank you. You confirmed all of my prejudices and complete inability to read history or policy. Thank you.
Why aren't most imams like this?
Why don't most imams hate their own communities and advocate for systemic repression of them? Thank you. It was like finding that would be like the going to the rabbis that go to the Holocaust denial conference that Ahmadinejad did, who are just they either deny the Holocaust or it shouldn't have happened because they weren't following Jewish law, and then you quote tweet them and you're like, thank you. Why can't more rabbis speak like this? The honesty is refreshing. Jesus Christ! And by the way, another button that you have to put on, I realize now in the YouTube world, you need to button things because there's all these various versions of literalist idiots out there. None of this implicates. You can criticize Islam. You can be an ex-Muslim. You can object to religion. You can criticize the policies of Saudi Arabia, Iran, whatever. You have to disaggregate that from being a far right-wing xenophobe who is historically, anthropologically, and politically illiterate. That's the point. It's not terribly complicated. I have the most sympathy in this scene for ex-Muslims who grew up in abusive environments, as many people do in various contexts, but certainly in the context of religious fundamentalism. But I will say, there's a podcast, I believe it's called Difficult Conversations. Is that the name?
Ina, yep.
Ina, who's
Polite Conversations.
Polite Conversations. Ina, she's anonymous. Now, her whole career, I mean, she has a really good podcast. She's got a good amount of Twitter followers. Check her out on Patreon.
Couple like children's books, I think, right?
I think so. My point is,
teenagers, maybe.
She's successful. But she still has to work other jobs to support herself, and it is very specifically because she and there's actually some areas that I think I disagree with her on certain personalities and certain policies and so on. Although I've always enjoyed the conversation we had, was great. I have a lot of respect for her. The fact that she has not turned her critique of a community, which is valid, and her personal trauma, which reflects systemic problems that are real, the fact that she has not turned it into a bigoted grift on behalf of the most reactionary forces in U.S. and European society has held her back. And that tells you everything about these people. And I would recommend checking out her podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, the bar is so low for somebody who's willing to do that kind of scabbery.
100%.
Look at Brendan Straka. Not to bring him up again.
Whoa, we talk about that guy way too much, Jamie.
Brandon.
Sorry.
Stop saying Brendan. Dragging my name.
Wait.
My bad.
Brandon.
Brandon Stroka?
Brandon Strorka.
Perestroika? Do you know what that is, man?
Brandon
I'm sure
Troika.
he's watching.
Does
Brandon know what perestroika was?
No, I don't think so.
Perestroika was a partnership between Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev to bring Coca-Cola to the Soviet Union. Say it in your next video.
And that took down the wall.
Yeah, that took down the wall. Yeah. It was an operation to bring blue jeans, the Velvet Underground, and Coca-Cola to the Soviet Union. You're calling from a 214 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is William in LA, originally from Dallas.
Hey, William, what's going on?
Hey, I actually have a comment about yesterday's talk with Sam, somebody talking about slavery in the Civil War, and Sam had a question about just how different the North and the South were at the time and how that sort of led up to the Civil War.
Okay.
Cool. So just to kind of give some background, the South and the North are very different economically at the beginning of the colonial period.
Right.
The South being much more of a plantation slave labor economy. The North sort of an amalgamation of commercial interests, including banking, trade, frontiering, homesteading. Not too much interesting there. And while the South was substantially more wealthy than the North, you still had quite a bit of inequality in the South. And the systems were pretty much compatible at the founding of the Constitution, but basically everything changed in the Industrial Revolution. The reason it changed was because of value-added manufacturing, where, say, a $100 bale of cotton could be imported and turned into textiles that could be then sold for $500 in a way that wasn't possible before the invention of heavy machinery and industrial processes. So the South actually shifted.
This is fascinating, but we gotta get somewhere quick because we're tight today. So could you? I mean, I wish we had more time actually because I'm interested in this. But just what's the point?
Yeah. So basically, when the North ended up industrializing, they were able to just basically control Congress because they had a majority of the population in the United States because they brought in immigrants to have cheap labor in the factories, and they also had more westward expansion into Indian territories to basically win the Senate for slave states. And it's because the North adapted capitalism more quickly that ironically, ended up bringing them to a point where they could control the South and end up, having the power to say, abolish slavery or to, change the way that...
That isn't exactly how it played out, though, because there was still literally a civil war. I mean, I know, I get what you're saying, but that's not exactly how it played out, because they literally needed to fight a massive and complicated civil war, which also included... I'm looking into this more because I want to do more content on this, but even like Free State of Jones things, like some types of internal conflicts in the South. There were not in any significant measure, but there were Southern factions that fought against the Confederates because they realized that they were on the bottom of the economic totem pole. So I mean, I'm not. It's a fascinating point, but I just think it shouldn't be. I don't want some libertarian listening to misinterpret what we're saying as an endorsement of the capitalism gradually evolves us from slavery argument, because that isn't how it happens.
Yeah, and
there was a civil war.
It's not fair to say that the South didn't adopt capitalism, right? Because where was that cotton going? It was going to the factories. Like it was all part of a supply chain.
That's right.
And that is intimately linked with the rise of slavery as well.
Definitely. Slavery was absolutely built. I mean, allowed for American capitalism.
It was one of the engines of it.
It was an engine of American capitalism.
The North's hands were not clean on that.
Well, and neither anybody else. And up until like there's also that like Calhoun and like the South's distinct foreign policy and the through line that goes into modern libertarians today, actually. So, but that's fascinating, man. I appreciate the call.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, let's do these sounds. Joe Biden, he's thinking about running for president. I'm going to continue to unpopularly say this on the show. He's a capable politician. I think if he was the nominee, I think Bernie certainly would have won. And I think Bernie was, obviously is what we need. But Joe Biden would have smoked Donald Trump. We have an opportunity to actually assess candidates on the merits, whether they be Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris, Beto O'Rourke, any of them, for what we actually need to do to not only get out of the crisis we're in, but actually solve long-term problems so that the crisis is not replicated. And Joe Biden, there's a hell of a lot more to get back into about this guy. The bankruptcy bill, Iraq, his role in the drone program during the Obama administration, Anita Hill, the crime bill. This is a bad record. The Biden crime bill. He's going to talk about the violence against women provision in it, which we like. But that whole bill is hugely catastrophic. Side note, Bernie Sanders did vote for that bill. Mistake. However, the same people that hack him for it, most of them, the people they support, if they were in politics, not only supported that bill, they helped write it. And also, if he had voted against it, because on the totality of it, it was a mass attack on poor and people of color and an expansion of the prison industrial complex, those same people would say Bernie Sanders voted for violence against women. So watch out for that. But this is Joe Biden today in 2018 showing us that he just does not get it.
To change, in my view. I think they're answers. One, first I think we have to do is we have to deal with income inequity. I love Bernie, but I'm not Bernie Sanders. I don't think 500 billionaires are the reason why we're in trouble. I hope my grandkids grow up to don't listen to their parents who all decided to do something, run the World Food Program, another one be Attorney General, another one run a social organization for at-risk youth. They got all this education, and I should have had a Republican kid. So when they put me in a home, I'd have a window with a view. You know what I mean? But now there's going to be no view. But all kidding aside, we have not seen this huge concentration of wealth. And the folks at the top aren't bad guys. I get in trouble in my party when I say wealthy Americans are just as patriotic as poor folks. I found no distinction. I really haven't. But this gap is yawning. It's gaping. And it's having the effect of pulling us apart. You see the politics of it. And the country's not going to stand for it forever. So we have to deal with the tax code. It's wildly skewed toward taking care of those at the very top. It overwhelmingly favors investors over workers. And it's riddled with unproductive expenditures.
Okay, so he ends a little bit better there with a kind of basic center-left message.
It gets worse again.
I'm sure it gets worse again, which we've sort of moved the party in the right direction of, in large part due to Bernie Sanders. But, there's a lot going on there. And I think, and part of it, I'll just talk about this clinically. He's stuck in the 80s and 90s. Yep. There was a time when objectively, believe it or not only did the Democratic Party need to socially signify on things like race and crime and welfare in very reactionary ways that Bill Clinton was the exemplar of, but they actually did need to signify on capitalism and comfort with business. There's no mystery why, when this stuff started to migrate across the Atlantic, that one of Tony Blair's top associates said that New Labor was intensely relaxed about people getting ultra rich. And that was in a government that won a massive landslide. Like, we have to be real that there was a time where there was an electorate for this stuff. It's rapidly disappearing on even the center left. So he's just historically out of date. 2, well, let's pivot it either way. Is it about the personal moral shortcomings of billionaires? No. It's about a structure that rewards incumbent wealth systemically. So if you don't want to personalize it, you can say, hey, maybe all these billionaires are the nicest people on earth, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But actually, structurally, it is designed literally exclusively to benefit these people and their corporations, and that's why you have the issues he identified, like income inequality. Now, third, though, and this is where the two trains of thought collide with each other and become a big problem, we've actually learned that it's a hell of a lot more effective as a campaign strategy to say the millionaires and the billionaires, because it simplifies and distills and gets us away from all the neoliberal wonkery and the fucking West Wing nonsense that he's doing there for the simplified version of the real case about structural inequity and who the economy is designed to support and not. And just as a final addendum, while they might not all be bad people, there sure are endless stories of scumbag billionaires that you can happily pepper your campaign with to fill in the detail on why none of these people should have the resources they have.
Yeah, you can hate the player and the game, I firmly believe.
Right,
but
exactly.
It does speak to some of the limitations of left populism, right? Because obviously it's a huge improvement over right-wing populism, which is, many would say a phony populism. But it personalizes the issue and makes it about individuals and them being good or bad people, where we should be talking about the system that allows for that kind of wealth accumulation. And it is a lot harder. Like, it's politically it's a more complex, difficult thing to talk about, but I would like to see Bernie start to do that.
I mean, I think it's just much easier to tell people what a capitalist is than what capitalism is, basically. That's fundamentally what it comes down to. And when you get people to understand that capitalists are the ones making your decisions, which is basically... Like, how they used to complain about bureaucrats? Like, you want bureaucrats making all these decisions?
Right.
Yeah, now it's Jeff Bezos. It's not much of an improvement.
Do you want corporate bureaucrats do you want corporate oligarchs making your... Corporate oligarch bureaucracies making your decisions? And, of course, the big functional difference is that even those old bureaucracies, which we're not moving towards and we actually want to evolve out of too, they were at least, and you see this today, they're actually trying to benefit you on some level, which is a radical difference.
Although I think, to Matt's point, saying that is Jeff Bezos much better? I believe that Amazon is the most trusted institution by Democrats as of
Jesus
October.
Christ. See, this is why we're going door to door
man.
and talking to people in Long Island City and elsewhere, because people need to know.
Yeah, Amazon's just now started targeting the low-performing products on its website. It's coming.
Yeah.
They haven't made their pivot
That's
yet.
the thing, yeah. Amazon it's coming at Amazon. It's coming. You're calling from a 720 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
This is James from Denver.
James, what's going on?
Nothing much, man. I'm just calling because why is everybody shitting on Angela Nagel now?
Oh man, you really want to talk? I don't think we have
Quite
time.
the call for 2:10
She
p.m.
went on Tucker Carlson talking about immigration in a way that was friendly.
I mean, look, I'm not gonna.
She published a very, very bad article called "The Socialist Case Against Open Borders," in which she either ignorantly or, just on purpose, disingenuously conveyed some extremely ahistorical and just false arguments about immigration.
All right,
I
I think
used data from right-wing think tanks and kind of told on herself.
I think that okay, all right.
And I did a whole episode just showing, with an actual labor historian, breaking down the lies and the bad arguments that she was using, and that people like Tucker Carlson use as well.
All right, I think that, and I'm just not gonna dwell too much on this, but I think that there's a context behind this Angela Nagel thing. I know that this upsets a lot of people, but it is what it is. She wrote a book that is a good book. It is a very worthwhile book to read to understand some of the in-time dynamics of the last couple of years. When I had her on my show, I challenged her on some of the broader historical context of that book. I don't agree with all of her assertions, but I agree with a lot of them. And I think it's been really unfortunate because I think that there has been a sort of symbiotic cycle in the last couple of years of, look, there's plenty of things to criticize her on, but some of the criticisms of her are ridiculous. Like, people were calling her a Nazi, People were calling,
and people are saying she did a podcast with Sargon of Akkad, which isn't true. He uploaded it. She debated him at the university in Ireland, and she made him look stupid as shit.
Right.
You know?
So there's a lot of...
I mean, that is a bad move to go on Tucker Carlson, but
let me just say...
how people just get rid of people.
I
don't know.
I 100% agree with you. I think the vampire castle is very alive and well, and it's a big problem, and I don't support it. But I will say this. That piece... Again, some people said she's shown herself to be a Nazi or whatever. That's ridiculous, I don't what she did show herself to be in that piece is kind of economically illiterate and making basically a third way Clinton-style argument. It wasn't a Nazi argument. It was a Clintonian argument, which was... not only was it profoundly the wrong time to write that piece in terms of the actual reality of what's happening at the border, it also, it ironically, because so much of the drama around Nagel has nothing to do with the real stuff in the world. It's all of these interscene debates, some of which are important, some of which would be better if people just logged off. But it read to me like she's fed up for some very justifiable reasons, and also she doesn't absorb valid criticisms. It's a dialectic in my view. But she's fed up, and then she goes and she's going to write a kind of fuck you piece to the left. And then the proxy for that is immigration, which in the real world, what's happening right now is that there's no open borders argument that's on the table. That's an irrelevant. That's a red herring in two ways. One is that the left socialist utopian no borders thing has nothing to do with anything that we're dealing with today, whether you agree with it or not. It's irrelevant. Sorry, hard fact.
That is the mainstream position on the socialist left, though. Her position is not a mainstream one on the socialist left.
Whatever. I mean, I'm talking on an actual even socialists that are more policy oriented are know that there is a process by which it gets there, right? That's not, nobody is in a discussion today saying oh yeah, tomorrow we're going to just shut down all borders. That's not what's happening.
It's a horizon.
Sure. And it's a horizon that I agree with, and I'm happy to say that, but it has nothing to do with what we're talking about, right? What people are talking about is a horrifically violent apparatus that is abusing people in some of the most obscene and barbarous ways imaginable. And then, and other things just to add to it too, you know, the libertarian version of quote unquote open borders ain't open. It's highly controlled, highly bureaucratized, very violent, but it just moves cheap labor. So, you know, look, go to Dubai. Super easy to move around there labor-wise. There's zero rights for people, right? You know what I'm saying? So that's another thing. Rhetorically, it's totally different, and the actual meat of it is having a critique of ICE and things like that. Then the third point is, and where on just in a hard-headed way, and Bhaskar Sunkara went off on this, it just isn't, it's not an economically viable argument because we've already globalized to such an extent that you're not going to just be able to, like the engine of what drives wages down is the corporate sector. It's not immigrants.
And so the criminalization of migration as well drives wages down for everybody.
I agree with that, but I'm saying it's just a baseline. Like where we put our focus of analysis is the corporate sector, not migrants. So it depends, where do you want to start your argument? If you start your argument, if like the world is as it is and it's a given, maybe you could make some little tweak cases that a few more low-income jobs would open up without immigrants. But if you want to make the bigger case for restoring a social democracy and enhancing standards internationally, then there has to be a globally synchronized movement. And the last thing I will ding her on, and this is harder for me, because again, she wrote a good book. She's not a secret fascist or Nazi. And some of the criticisms of her have been insane and ridiculous. And I agree. I don't believe in getting rid of people like that. I'm with you. But this piece sucked. And the need to, and this is even before we get to the Tucker Carlson appearance. And then the last thing I'll say, which really started, this is when I started to get irritated when I read the piece. She's making all these arguments, and it's like, well, why don't we go to the AFL-CIO website and see what their position on these issues is? And their position is, as a mainstream, you know, non-radical, not like we're going to all have daffodils and dance together in the park and play drums in a socialist utopia, but as a fucking on-the-ground, powerful but under assault union in 2018 America, is 100% pro-solidarity and immigration reform. And that has infinitely more credibility than any of the like right-leaning scholars she's working from, as well as the fact that she didn't paint a fully historicized view of some of those previous anti-immigration moves, which absolutely were racialized. So look, I'm down. I'm never going to do this like, oh, she's done, she's canceled. I don't like that culture. I don't support it. I would have conversations with Angela Nagel. I think it's a great debate to have. And I also think there's another counter tendency of other people who have rightly reacted against that culture, the vampire culture, the Mark Fisher essay, where now it's like all of a sudden, like, we've got to defend her doing an uncritical appearance on Tucker Carlson. We have to pretend that this article is really important and really formidable. It's not. It sucks. It doesn't mean she's canceled. It doesn't mean that I don't like her book. And it doesn't mean I think I'm just saying what I think. And that's not how I go about things. And that leaves me in a position, ironically, where, of course, everybody's triggered by that. But that just is what it is.
So I acknowledge...
Sorry, James, go ahead. And then flow to Jamie. But what is it, James? I'm sorry.
I know you didn't want to go into that, and I really appreciate you breaking it down, because it's just so hard to even find anyone really discussing this well, you know? Like, because
I agree.
I couldn't tell what to trust on a take, because it's like, it would either be these tankies, like, oh, she's canceled, blah, 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 or people where it's like, oh, I can't even tell if maybe you aren't alt-right, you know? And
100%.
So I really appreciate it, and I think it's good to get back to dialogues with these things in the last, you know, just, I don't know. It was a bad move, bad piece, but, I don't know, people make mistakes, whatever. I appreciate it, man.
And I think there's also market conversations, because it's also like, frankly, and this is pure speculation. I don't know Angela Nagel, so this is pure speculation. But I also think, like, what is the relationship between, you know, these dynamics and depreciating work opportunities on the left? I think it's I hope it doesn't become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I hope she doesn't move to the right. But
she already has.
Well, I don't. one basis of what are you saying?
I mean, the publication that published that piece was sort of founded to become like the intellectual
No, I know, but I
wing
know
of
people
the
who are
Trump movement.
Yeah, but left people publish in right places sometimes. That's not inherently a problem. So I'm taking. I mean, have there been other issues that she's staked out? Have she been staking other issues out on the right?
Her association with Spiked is another major red flag for me.
I don't
just
know
like
about
making
the Spiked
friends
story.
with some very questionable
No,
people.
but actual positions, actual things.
Yeah, I mean, okay, what I was going to say about Kill All Normies was when that book first came out, like I acknowledge, most of us acknowledge that like this kind of shrill, nasty social justice warrior or whatever is a thing on the liberal left. And if that was my only experience of the left, I might not become a right winger, but I might just not do anything, which is also bad.
Right.
Like
Definitely.
I acknowledge that that's a problem.
And I just want to add, because I think you're making a really important point. That was, by the way, that's the main point of that book. People superficially are like, her point is that because of Tumblr, the alt-right exists, okay? And that is part of what's going on in that book, and there's a little bit of validity to that argument, but that can be grossly overstated. But the bigger, more important point, if you're really reading it, is the material conditions of 2012 were such that there was a ripe time to have a materialist left, and then what had become left in the mainstream culture was just these like shadow boxing Twitter games and not solidarity and not politics. And that was correct. And that was an important critique.
But here's the thing. Like, we should not critique those people because they care too much about like transgender rights or whatever. We should critique them because they're liberals and they have no class politics. And this isn't a problem that I've seen on the socialist left in any substantial way in the real world, which makes me think it's been used as a bit of a straw man, I think, in leftist circles in a way that I don't like. Also, if that's your bailiwick, I'm sorry, I don't trust you.
What do you mean, bailiwick?
Like, if that's your thing, your primary issue,
what
that
primary
people, SJWs or whatever, the mean,
well, I know there's a prime. I mean, she wrote a critique because she saw a problem in left cult. I mean, I don't know if that makes it your bailiwick, but whatever. I mean.
Well, here's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, now I lost my train of thought because I'm angry.
My point with the Nagel thing was I'm allergic to a lot of the tribalism around all of this, and I think and I finally
we're allergic to some of the tribalism even today. We were talking about like Rebecca Traister is very much not our politics, profoundly so. But the like, oh, she's canceled because she opposed Bernie. Like, I'm just not. I don't like this shit.
And
regardless of where it goes, even with politics, I really have very different politics from.
And I read Kill All Normies because of the controversy around it, and I understand why people were upset with certain causality implications of some of the things she says.
Right.
But I also thought like her tactical critiques of certain things that obviously play into alt-right propaganda, I think is a case that people need to be allowed to make. The thing that bothered me about it was like my whole position on that whole book was like, I'm going to wait till the next thing let's see more body of work. I don't really care to predict whether she's going to go Nazi or not. Like, that's not a game I'm playing.
We've seen more.
Yeah,
now.
we don't play that.
That's what I'm saying.
Right.
So we see the next piece. That's where she decided to go. And then also the new Jill Lepore book basically reproduced the most, I think, vulgar and offensive thesis that you could pull, like reduce Nagel's book to as what the modern like culture war is.
But that's on Jill Lepore, not Angela Nagel.
It is. I agree with that. But the problem
especially
is
because Jill Lepore, frankly, is a more highly credentialed, more important platform person than anybody else in this conversation.
Exactly. That's why it's like, God damn it. Like you just keep running into like, to the point where like I was basically on the, I don't want to hear about Nagel because I think like the book is fine for what it is. And I don't think you can draw any like larger conclusions about it because who does that really serve? But I think even now, like what is like the correct critique of the immigration piece is on the economics. It's on some of the ahistoricity, and it's on the fact that it's 90s style Clintonian politics, literally as evidenced by the fact that Hillary Clinton echoed the sentiments on the same week that the piece came out.
Conveniently enough.
Make that critique. that was the problem. As soon as it came out, I mean, I was more than happy to register because I realized it was important for some people because they, sometimes, it's like they have a perception that I had this huge investment because I like the book and I'm not willing to play the vampire game with her. But it's like, I was totally willing. I read the piece. I thought it was I mean, I'll keep using adjectives. I thought the piece sucked. And so I said so. And Bhaskar had a much more elaborate thread on it, which I pointed people to. But then it was like, and this proves that she's like Himmler. And it's like, okay, just stop.
Here's
like,
the
that's
thing,
ridiculous.
Here's
like,
the
just
thing.
argue. It's Clintonian. It's ahistorical. Those are in my world, those are plenty negative terms without making up extra shit.
Certainly, but like you got to wonder why she's doing that.
I don't play that game.
And where that's coming from.
I don't play
and
that
why
game.
she would be so disingenuous, because I don't think she's ignorant about the left. I think she's playing a game that's really creepy. But what I was going to say before was there are good faith disagreements among leftists about how to approach issues of quote unquote identity politics. So, and this is something that Sean reminded me actually when we were talking about Kill All Normies. Like, you have to assume good faith on the part of your fellow leftists when you're arguing about these things. And after that immigration take, I don't anymore. She's not getting the benefit of the doubt from me.
Okay. Yeah, I hear that. And
Well,
she
yeah,
did
right.
not. So, I'm not. I don't, some of this is just difference in methodologies and ways of argument. But what I'll totally say is, it was a bad piece.
If she writes an amazing piece on climate change, I'll maybe change my, I'm always open to new evidence.
You know my trouble, but it's also like she wrote some very good pieces for Current Affairs as recently as like 2017. And it's like the ethos that's like, oh, you tweet that out, but she's canceled because of this. Fuck all that. And frankly, fuck all that in the opposite direction too. I'll tweet out a Rebecca Traister piece if it's good.
Yeah.
I don't play that game. And we need to radically decrease that way of going about things across the board. Emotionally, strategically, politically, bad look. Thanks for the call, brother.
It's just
or maybe
people like this guy, right?
or maybe no
thanks,
thanks
Ed.
for the call, because it could have been fun and funny.
Yeah. I mean, we're trying to peel like this is why to people who aren't as plugged into this stuff, right?
Right.
Like this is why you I think
This is
the
why you
tribal
don't
game-
engage.
Well, no, this is
I love Brendan.
Because-
Brendan with like the smartest take. Brendan's just like, this is why you just walk away from these dumpster fires.
like I think when people just use it as like sort of tribal signifiers, it
Yes.
confuses the fuck out of people.
100%. And that's what we just got to get the fuck away from. And also realize, like, we are all, what does Bodega Boys say? God is working on all of us.
God's working on all of us.
I mean, my God. like, and it's, and then we spend time on, look, Gavin McInnes, that's a pretty fucking that's an easy one to figure out. Most people, certainly most people on the left, are a hell of a lot more complicated. Thanks, man.
I don't remember which. I think it was the Chapo pre-recorded call-in episode, but I think Matt Christman had a good take on the inner fighting of the left that I found very
What did he say?
enlightening. I can't do it justice because I can't monologue like that guy, but basically that...
Want a drink? I love Christman. No, Chrisman's super
I would check
astute.
that out, though.
He's super astute about stuff like that.
I might be more on Virgil's side in that discussion, but also I think they could have had it for longer.
We got to get going. Ooh, I'm sorry, guys. We got to get out of here. All right, we got to play. Sorry? Yes, let's do this. Let's play one last piece of sound. This was great. Anand Dardis. I would like props for at least 50% improvement over Sam's pronunciation of his name. He was speaking at the Davos, an EY event. And Chicago, excuse me. He's speaking at the Chicago Ideas Festival, which was sponsored in part by EY, a company called EY, and
Ernst & Young.
Ernst & Young, which is what is that? It's an accounting company, right?
Yeah.
It's a big global accounting conglomerate, and he noticed something about another event that he had been to, or another event that. This event. No, I understand, but all right. He also noticed that EY, Ernst & Young, had sponsored another event. as well.
The small point, I couldn't help noticing we got EY sponsoring this, and they're sponsoring ideas, and I want to leave them with an idea today. As of today, they're still listed in the knowledge partners of the Saudi Investment Conference, the Davos in the Desert. How many of you want to encourage them to pull out, if they haven't already, of that conference? Good. I couldn't, I hope you'll excuse me, but that's what ideas are for, and we got to be real.
Beautiful.
The small point, I couldn't help notice.
Not only, so that's so beautiful and so perfect. And I can't help but echo, because I guess part of the theme of today's show is this, is commenting. Like, that's what call-out culture is for in the main.
Powerful.
It is the powerful institutions that run this planet. And him using a platform like that, which could have serious consequence, like that does risk real material consequence to break that kind of social convention, is just incredible. All right, final call, then I'll read a few IMs, and then we are out of here. Sorry, I cannot get to all calls. My apologies. But you've been on the line for a while. You're calling from a 484 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Oh, is that me?
Yes.
Oh, great. I'm calling from Harrisburg, PA, but I'm originally from Venezuela.
Oh, hey, what's on your mind, man? What's your name?
My name is Mauricio. I was calling. I've been wanting to tell you this for a while. I do share a lot of your positions and policy positions here in the U.S.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that the left doesn't talk enough, or doesn't really attack enough, the Venezuelan government and the Venezuelan dictatorship. And that hurts the left movement here, because it leaves room open to attack the left movement.
Could you do me a favor, man? And I'm really sorry, but I'm actually trying to respect what you're doing, because I think you're raising actually a really important point, and we really need to go in a minute. Could you either call tonight on my show or call another time I'm hosting? I think in short, though, we would have to really spell out specifically what you're talking about. I know in the case of this show, as an example, I know that we're perfectly willing to criticize the shortcomings of an example, the Maduro government. But I also know that in the main, my job is to oppose U.S. intervention and U.S. interference. That's really my basic position. But I have no, I don't need to have a fantasy version of a government just because it's on the left. Now, that being said, there's other examples where I think there's just an inaccurate U.S. view of things that are actually very defensible and very important. And obviously, I'm thinking of the Workers' Party governments that were in Brazil. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. This is definitely a topic that requires, I think, a little bit of, going into detail.
Okay, brother, please call back, because that's a great topic. I appreciate it. I'll get to you next time first. Thanks a million. Okay, folks. The Sargon getting banned thing is interesting, in that all of a sudden the people on the right are suddenly concerned about the power of giant companies wield over their lives. Does that mean that they might opt for a critique of capitalism now? No. They will blame cultural Marxists, as you say.
They just want better capitalists.
Yeah. All right. What up, MR crew? Can you tell Chuck Schumer that we haven't been serious and only kidding the entire time? We're sorry, America. Left is best.
I'll tell him tonight.
Okay, sure. Yeah, we'll tell him in the conference call. Okay, Milo is threatening to expose undocumented students. I didn't remember what it was. I just knew that with Milo, there's a totally different dynamic than just speech. Let's see. All right, the final IM of the day goes to Matty Youth. Speaking of Jill Lepore, does MR Crew have any thoughts on these truths?
It's I don't know, for your 8th grade nephew or niece. I don't know. I thought it was kind of basic.
Instead of a final IM fanfare, I gave Matt a final diss fanfare.
Read Hobsbawm.
Read Hobsbawm. As always, I appreciate everybody. Thanks. I think it's very fun when the four of us are bantering. Thanks, everybody. We're back live tomorrow. See you tonight, Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive